next story is from Big Kappa 69. I won over $5,000 for in court after a car accident that I caused. Okay, so just a little bit of info before I get into the story. Also, sorry this might get a little long, but I hope it's worth it. I, 22M, work construction and run a few crews, and I'm a foreman because I've been working in this field since I started working summers when I was 14. That's legal in my state. With this being said, I have a lot of experience and get paid really well. For my job, I need a truck that can pull a lot of trailers and also get into a lot of sketchy job sites, especially in the winter. So I drive a new lifted pickup, F350. Anyways, let's get into it. So, about 4 months ago now, I got off work one day and just really didn't feel like making dinner. So I decided to go get myself the trusty Big Mac at McDonald's. Well, after I got my order, I was going to pull out into the parking lot to drive home, and I was looking hard over to my left to see how busy the road was before I got over there. Well, I wasn't paying great attention to what was happening in front of me, and as I was creeping forward, someone who was in front of me was stopped and not paying attention either. I ended up barely hitting his mirror and scraping his door with my front end. I immediately reversed and hopped out. I made sure the guy was okay and apologized, knowing it was my fault, and I asked him if he wanted to call the cops. "Let's call him Brent," Brent says. "Nah, bro, we are all good. If you just get me your insurance info, I think we can get this taken care of." I was fine with that, as there was no damage done to my truck, and it's not required to call the cops for an accident if it occurs in a private parking lot. This is relevant later. We exchange info, and he seems pretty cool, so I tell him to go get the damage bid, and I'll just pay in cash so my insurance rates don't go up as long as he's okay with it. He says that's fine, and we both just leave, and I feel like a moron. But all in all, Brent seems like a cool dude, and I just hope we can get it sorted out smoothly. About a month passes by, and I haven't heard anything from Brent or the shop I told him to go to. Honestly, I wasn't too stressed about this, because if he decided to not get it done, that's on him. Well, he calls me up one day at about noon saying he can't remember my name and he wanted to tell the guys at the shop who sent him there because it seemed like we knew each other. I told him my name and the guys at the shop gave him a deal. Pretty sure they say this to everyone, LOL. He sends me the bid for damages and it comes out to $2,403. This was more than I imagined, but I said to get it done and I'd take care of the bill afterward. And that was that. He hung up, said it was cool, and I went on with my day as usual. Another month goes by, and I don't hear anything until Brent calls me up while I'm at work again and says, "Hey brother, I talked to the shop and they said they can't get me in for another 2 weeks or so, and they may end up charging me more if they find more damage." I say, "Okay, sounds good. Just let me know, man. I hope it goes smooth for you, and I'm sorry for the inconvenience." He seems to take it good, and I'm really trying to just be a good person. He responds with, "Well, after talking to my wife, I'm okay if you just wanted to write a check for $2,500 and we can call it even." This seemed odd to me because why the hell wouldn't someone want their vehicle repairs all paid for? I say, "Okay, man, let's set a time and place to meet and I'll get you paid." He liked the idea and ended the call by telling me he would let me know. Yet another month passes by and I hear nothing again. At this point, I'm getting fed up and just want this situation to stop being over my head. He hits me up at 11 p.m. one night and asks if we can meet in town. I found this kind of disrespectful because I was nearly asleep and had to be at work at 5 a.m. the next day. Either way, I said that was fine and took my $2,500 cash and wrote up a quick contract saying this payment would be accepted as payment in full for the damages, and by accepting it, it would release me from any and all liability. This was a pretty fair contract, I believe, as it was the deal we had already made over the phone, just in writing. I get to the place we suggested as a meet-up spot, I give him the cash, and he signs the contract without hardly even reading it, and he didn't want the copy. This was a red flag to me, but I just assumed he really didn't care about it all that much, so I just send him the photo of the contract and go back home for some beauty sleep. As you can guess by now, another fucking month goes by, with me just living life carefree and not a worry in the world about this stupid car accident. Well, I go to check my mail, and I have a notice from this guy's lawyer that he is suing me for not paying after wrecking his car. This pissed me off, but I also knew I had plenty of text messages and a contract on my side. I immediately call Brent and he blocks my number. Luckily enough, my girlfriend works for a lawyer, so I get him updated and he says he'd love to help. He lets me know I saved my ass by writing that contract, as any contract worth over $500 is to be held up in any level court in my state. I immediately get to work on my revenge. I remember on the side of this guy's car he had a business logo, and I took pictures of the damage, so I hop online and get to the BBB to look up who owns this company, thinking that surely he couldn't own the business, because he is such an idiot. I was wrong. This guy owns the company, and I can see that he has about 12 one-star reviews, all in dispute because of his shady business practices, telling people it will cost one thing and then charging them 4 times what he said it would. Sound familiar? Remember when he said, the shop may charge more than the original $2,403? That's right, he was suing me for $10,000. 4 times what the shop told him it would cost. Unbelievable. He was trying his same sneaky shit on me. My lawyer takes note of this, and we show up to court ready for war. This guy is sleazy. As we get there and all set up, he says, "You ready to give me more of Daddy's money?" with a smirk. I guess just 'cause I'm young and drive a nice truck and could afford $2,500, lol. His lawyer gets up and starts trying to say, BS from me hitting and running, and Brent barely got a picture of my license plate, to I tried bullying him into taking a deal for only $2,500 when the damage was clearly more than that. There were obvious holes in his story, and he really didn't have much to say. Just imagine the smile on my face as my lawyer lays out the printouts of our text messages and the physical copy of the contract, which was signed by Brent. His lawyer was ghostly white and looked sick. After laying out all of the evidence, my lawyer pulled out a little hidden gem, the printouts of all the complaints we found on the BBB, and how he was doing the same thing to me. That was the final nail in the coffin, as the judge said he had seen enough. He asked Brent for any final statements, and Brent said, "I don't even have the $2,500 anymore. Can I just get that then, and we will be okay?" Literally admitting to the judge that he had received my money and his story was just a load of horse shit. I thought his lawyer was going to strangle him. It was beautiful. The judge ended up ruling in my favor and demanded him to pay my legal fees as well as damages and lost wages because I had to miss work to be in court. The absolute sweetest part was that this particular day my crew was on a very high wage job, and I was technically the one getting paid before I paid them out as subcontractors. This means I was to be paid $475 per hour, and this whole ordeal took about 5 hours. He ended up having to pay me almost $5,000. I don't think I've ever been so happy in my life. Thought it was so long, I just really felt the need to share. Thank you to anyone who made it this far. It was really very cool to see Brent paying for his actions. After being sued for damages he had already paid, the OP used a signed contract, text evidence, and proof of the other party's shady business practices to win in court. Brent's lies backfired, and he had to pay nearly $5,000, including legal fees and lost wages. The next story from Epic Winter Wolf. Keep kicking myself and other students off our remote desktop link for the heck of it. Enjoy the consequences. So this happened last October in 2020, and I feel it's finally safe to share it. Given the situation at that time, going to campus was a no-go, so everything was online. As such, a lot of programs used for coursework, which were only on PC, needed a remote link for those of us on Macs or other devices. This link connects students to assigned desktops physically on campus through an application like Citrix. It would only allow students onto the desktops when another class was not remotely using that lab at the time, and at night when registered classes were done. The on-campus computers would show that their drives were in use, so the students who lived on campus would know that someone was remotely accessing it. Well, I was taking a course in remote sensing, which required access to programs such as ArcMap, ArcGIS, R, and Eridas. You can look them up. They were only available on PC, so I, as a MacBook user, needed to use the remote link. The issue started at the start of October, when I was working on an assignment in ArcMap. I was really startled when I was suddenly kicked out, and then furious because I hadn't had the chance to save my latest input. I then went back to the web page, re-input my student credentials, and logged into a different desktop. Not 2 minutes later was I logged out again. Rightly peeved, I emailed the professor and TAs about it and moved on to other homework. I figured it was a bug that it would soon be fixed. No, it continued throughout the entire fogging month. I ended up having to work on my remote labs between 9 p.m. and 2 a.m. as I literally was not able to work during the day without being kicked off. It was really annoying, especially since I couldn't even work during my assigned lab time. Other students started reporting this, and we'd get a lot of emails from IT. Updates, patches, and things like that we had to install to try and patch this bug. And nothing worked. It was painful. I decided that enough was enough and took a train to campus after my online morning classes. If it was going to keep booting me off the remote, then I would just go in person. I completed the online health check, got to campus no problem, and made my way to the building that housed all the PCs. Yes, we have a building that houses all the PCs for computer classes. Anyways, I went up and towards the lab that my credentials were registered to. I'm going to be honest. I wasn't expecting what I saw, but I sure was damn pissed. Through the windows into the lab, I saw two guys going from PC to PC, logging students off. At first I couldn't believe it, and then I got furious. They were laughing about screwing with hard-working students. I will call them dumb and dumber. I decided to get some payback. I pulled out my phone and placed it beside the window, and it was partially hidden by the trash bin inside the classroom, recording them and what they were doing. They didn't notice me, thank God, and I got onto my laptop, remote linking to my phone. I then got onto the university social media page and started to live stream the video from my phone. I put a title along the lines of, "Found the bugs kicking students off remote desktop. Video has been deleted, and I will explain soon." It didn't take long for fellow students to take notice of it, and it went viral within 30 minutes. Names were soon put out as Dumb and Dumber were recognized, and there was a lot of hate in the comments. Even campus police replied, asking for the location. I was all too happy to give it. It was then I saw on the stream that Dumb pulled out his phone and he started freaking out. He had noticed the stream and that it was live. I quickly rushed to grab my phone and retreat, and that's when Dumber rushed out the door and friggin' tackled me. We started brawling. It was self-defense, as he kept attacking me to grab my phone. And then I saw Dumb going for my laptop, which was hosting the stream, which was still being recorded from my phone. So, I kicked Dumber between the legs while elbowing him in the neck before jumping Dumb. To be honest, I don't really know what happened next, but I do remember campus police having to pull me off Dumb. Apparently, I had full-bodied tackled him away from my laptop and he punched me in the face. With me, apparently grabbing his carry-on bag, bashing him over the head with it, accidentally cracking his laptop. Oops. So, anyways, the fight was broken up and we were all taken down to the campus police office. To make a very long story short, I got a relative slap on the wrist for my part of it. Had to do some on-campus community service, but my record was kept clean. Thankfully, I was not charged for the fight or the laptop, as I was able to prove self-defense, and that they hit me first, tried to destroy my property intentionally, which made it worse for them. I was let off on the laptop for a technicality, as I was punched in the face, and had no idea that he even had a laptop in his carry-on. Phew. As for Dumb and Dumber, I was called in to testify at each of their hearings in December. Turns out kicking students off remote links was considered a very grave academic offence, as it was intentional tampering with others' work. The video stream I took was a big part of the evidence against them, and CCTV proved that they had been doing it for weeks. In almost all the computer labs, they had intentionally messed with over 100 students. Adding to attacking me, I had a nice shiner for a month, and my devices, instead of running, they got into pretty hot water. Now, The reason this wasn't discovered sooner was due to the fact that this remote link was new to us, and IT was still working through the bugs. I don't know exactly what happened next, as they just needed me to come in, masked, and tell what I did and remembered. However, I did get notification in my email in March this past year that 2 students were expelled for intentional tampering of other students' work. Can you guess who? Yup, Dumb and Dumber got the boot for their dumb actions. It gets even better though. Turns out they were here on student visas, which meant that not only were they expelled from the university with a black mark on their records, they were also given the boot from the country, and most definitely back to their very disappointed parents. Maybe it's karma, but they got publicly exposed on a live stream for their actions for all the school to see, which was taken down due to it needing to be evidence against them and all. But, yep, they were expelled twice for their dumb actions, and with their names in campus infamy for their stunt. Hope they've learned their lesson. Edit. Wanted to add that they were actually put on a cargo flight home, as their country wasn't allowing passenger flights. They had to go because, without their visas, they were in the country illegally, which would land them in even deeper hot water. The university actually took mercy on them and paid for the flight. And I agree. They may have acted stupid, but that's no reason to have to deal with border security or whatnot. I only know this because I ran into, and was able to talk with, one of the campus officers who told me what happened. I went in person for a lab this recent September. So, yeah. Those guys had to take a cargo flight home. I think the uncomfortable experience they would have had was enough of a punishment compared to being in lockup until their country's borders opened, or until other arrangements could be made. Edit 2. Wow, didn't expect it to blow up like it did. Truly astonishing. Thank you all. Edit 3. Okay, wow. Looks like I need to correct some very inaccurate comments. First off, I'm not from Poland. Beautiful place though. I'm in Canada, that actually exists, and am a former American citizen. Second, I can't say exactly, but Dumb and Dumber are from East Europe or Asia, I'm not certain. Thirdly, sadly, Canadians are actually smarter and politer on average than most Americans. Something I have noticed. Also, this isn't a place to have discussions about whether Apple is good or not. This is about pro-revenge, and I'd rather not have my reapproved post locked down because of you guys going off topic. So please, stop. Edit 4. Seriously, is no one actually reading the first sentence? This is a repost of my story that was originally taken down due to a miscommunication between the mods over Rule 6. That issue is now resolved. So I'm reposting. Thank you. Edit 5. Do I seriously have to clarify this? Fine. I'm a 6-foot+ tall woman who works out weekly and during my childhood, and teens excelled in fighting sports and self-defense classes such as karate, judo, jiu-jitsu, boxing, and enjoyed and excelled in basketball, volleyball, dodgeball, I consider it a sport, baseball, softball, swimming, cycling, skiing, and recently added archery, all while excelling in my science classes. I am also broad-shouldered, and from all those sports I enjoy, very, very strong. I know how to fight and how to take down others much larger than I. In high school, I beat up bullies, male bullies, on the daily. Even though I haven't been as active in the past few years due to university homework crunch, I have stayed very fit. So yes, I could take Skinny Dumb and Skinner Dumber, who were both shorter than I by a foot at minimum, easily. They just happened to get the drop on me. I still kicked their butts, and they're lucky I didn't break any bones. And the reason I didn't press charges, or really notice if charges of assault on me were pressed, was because I just wanted to move on and do all the homework that had piled up due to Dumb and Dumber. The term was only 4 months, sept to dec, with December being final exam time. So I'm sorry if I didn't care about what the university was doing with them. I just wanted to get my homework in, so I didn't fail my courses. Also, can no one read? Like, seriously? OP did a very good job by exposing the 2 students who had been sabotaging others' work. The revenge was really epic, and OP destroyed academic career of Dumb and Dumber by getting them fired and deported back to their country. The revenge was really satisfying. What do you think about it? Next story is from MNWNM. Hell hath no fury, like me scorned. This story starts 31 years ago, but the revenge part was pure serendipity that began 2 years ago. I'm going to shorten most parts because it's a crazy ride, but I'll be happy to answer any questions you all have. I learned a futon on this journey, and part of the reason for this write-up is to share that with others. The beginning. In 1990, when I was just out of middle school and my sister was still in elementary, my dad met his third wife at the only gas station in our town. They soon moved in together, and my dad abandoned us in our basement apartment to live on a shanty houseboat that didn't run, to live with her. He would show up every other week and give me $40 for groceries. Eventually, someone figured out the situation and called my mom. We went to live with her, which was, believe it or not, worse. My dad and his shanty wife got married in 1991. Not long after, she called me and told me my dad's brain tumor had returned. It hadn't, and that he couldn't handle the stress of being around us. That the only people he could bear to be around was her. And her son, Shorty, who was my age. When I called my dad to ask if this was true, he said it wasn't, and he just couldn't believe that she would say that to begin with. That was one of our last conversations until 2 years ago. The middle. There's not much in this part. I worked my way through college, living in my car from time to time. My dad and I were no contact, but I heard from family that he'd bought a house and put his son through some vocational classes. When my grandmother died, Shorty and shanty wife showed up in a truck and took all the furniture and anything else that wasn't tied down or already gone. Eventually, I went no contact with my dad's side of the family. I struggled for years, decades really, but I made it. And I have a great job and a good family now. The best revenge is living well, right? The pre-end warm-up. 2 years ago, Oct 2019. I got a call from my dad's brother, Alan. He told me my dad was in a nursing home in another state. Great. And I needed to go see him because he needed my help. WTF? Shorty had ghosted him. The nursing home, coincidentally, was about 20 minutes from my house, and I saw an opportunity, and I went. The reunion was underwhelming. I didn't want to make amends, but I did want to hear how he wound up dumped and all alone in another state. And it was a really, really good story. Shanty wife got lung cancer and put my dad in a nursing home before she died in 2017. She suffered, and I was happy to hear it, but sad it wasn't ass cancer. Shorty became his power of attorney, POA, when she died, and had been visiting my dad, living in my dad's house with his 2 children, and taking care of my dad's affairs since his mom died. But now he was MIA, and my dad was worried about him. He asked me to drive the hour and a half to his house to check on everything. That's all he wanted. He never even asked me how I had been. I agreed to go, I think out of morbid curiosity. I'd never even been to my dad's house. I did want to see where he lived with his real family for 30 years. I wanted to see what could have been my life. It was 50 shades of fucking awful. The grass hadn't been cut all summer. You couldn't get to the front door for the overgrowth. There were 3 pickup trucks in the yard. 2 were full of trash. Cabs and beds and back seats. Just trash. Mail, clothes, paper, shoes, garbage bags. I couldn't understand it. My dad's handicapped modified SUV was on 4 flats and full of garbage too. I didn't have a key, so I just walked around. From what windows I could look through, the inside was in shambles and hoarded to hell. On the front and carport doors were dozens of notices from the city that they were going to condemn the place. The carport was also hoarded, boxes and boxes stacked on each other, most rotting from the rain. The yard was full of garbage. Broken Christmas ornaments, more shoes, rusted tools, old toys. There was a letter in the mailbox notifying him that since the house was abandoned, mail would not be delivered anymore. That night, I Googled powers of attorney and how to use them. I went back the next day and showed my bedbound dad the pictures on my phone. He vowed to beat Shorty's ass, then asked me to help more. I told him I would, but he'd have to sign power of attorney over to me. All of it durable, financial, and medical. If he didn't, he could figure this shit out by himself. He agreed, so I set about finding a lawyer who would drive to another state and do the paperwork in the nursing home. Bless that lawyer for being so good at his job, because all I did was tell him what I knew, and he put together a beautifully bulletproof POA. It was full of stuff I didn't even know I would need. He also filed the paperwork to revoke Shorty's POA. And now I'm unstoppable. We're from a small rural town, and it's the kind of creepy landlocked place that, no matter how long you've been gone or how far away you've been, when you go back, you'll see someone you know. Even if you don't know, you know them. It's like playing 7 Degrees of Everybody all the time. It's suffocating, but it can also be helpful. The beginning of the end. I got to work the next morning. I didn't know how scorched the earth would be when I finished, and I didn't want Shorty or anyone from his prolific, inbred family trying to find me, so I made sure nothing I did had my name on it. I opened a Google account for my dad and got a Google number. I opened a P.O. box for him in his town. I put in a mail forwarding notice. I pulled his credit report. I took the POA to my dad's small town bank, changed the address on his accounts, and got new account numbers. I requested copies of every transaction back to the day Shanty wife had died, about 13 months worth. I had to go to the main branch, 2 hours from my house, the next day to pick the records up. I sat in the lobby all afternoon, going through the account. I cornered a service rep and got a crash course in his debits and deposits. This is when I figured out the extent of Shorty's staggering stupidity. My dad got about 5 cars a month in disability and social security every month. Twice a week, Shorty was going into a branch and withdrawing cash. All of the cash. For 13 months. And every time he did it, as the POA, he had to sign a form stating that he was acting on behalf of my dad, and that form was notarized by the bank. I went through every withdrawal and got the bank to confirm that every one of them was made by Shorty. Then I went to the house and called a locksmith. I knew it was bad, but I had no idea what was waiting for me there. He got the first door open and the stench rolled out like a fog bank. We both gagged. 2 locks later, I was so embarrassed by what he had to see and smell, I gave him a $60 tip. And, with shiny new keys in hand, I called the cops. I told them I was POA for my dad, was checking on his house, and there were 3 vehicles there that didn't belong to him. He asked me if I knew who they belonged to. I said no, and I wanted them towed. He told me to call a tow company and he would meet them there. They showed up with 2 wreckers. The tow truck guy got out and asked me for a signature. I only signed my first name. As I was signing, he asked, "Do you know Shorty?" Running on pure hatred at this point, I surprised myself. "Do you?" I asked. He said he did, and that he's an asshole. I responded, "He might be. Hey, can you do me a favor? If you see him, will you tell him MNWNM is coming for him?" His bravado evaporated. He knows a crazy bitch when he sees one. They towed the trucks. When everyone was gone, I opened the door in the carport to peek in. The sun was going down, and it was dark in the house. I heard something faint, and after some seconds realized it was the roaches and the rats doing their roach and rat stuff. I could smell it all in my hair. I sat on the carport steps and watched the sun go down. I was mad. Just so fucking cosmically livid that 72 hours was all it took to dissolve 3 decades, and here I was, stinking and listening to the rats and cleaning everyone else's shit up. Taking time away from my family, and for what? I had a coming to Jesus with myself. I could either bow out now or double down. And the thing is, I'm tenacious, to a goddamn fault. I had to be to survive, and this was a bone I couldn't put down. The thought of Shorty's life being upended, his only source of income, probably, disappearing literally overnight, and my dad having to hear, secondhand from me, that he's broken alone, made me absolutely giddy. I desperately wanted them both to lose what they had left. So I decided I was going to triple dog down. That night, I Googled restraining orders, and it was surprisingly easy to get one. I went to the courthouse in my hometown, went to the clerk's office, and told her I needed a restraining order. I filled the form in at a rickety little table while I was there. I wasn't prepared to see a judge that day, but she took the form and said, "Okay, I'll see if the judge is still here." That kind of scared me. She took me to his chambers, and as I was waiting, I looked around and saw he had certificates of appreciation hanging up from various veterans groups. Then I wiped my palms and thought, fish in a fucking barrel. He asked about my dad's stint in the Marines and about the DoD office logo on my sweater. I'm a contractor. He read my form and granted the temporary order. I would have to go back for the permanent one, where Shorty would be able to argue against it. Then I went home and Googled biohazard companies and elder abuse statutes in my state. I hired a biohazard company to shovel all shit out of the house for $7,000. I would have paid double. They found my dad's mummified dog under some pizza boxes in the master bedroom. They sent me pictures and salvaged some papers. Shorty was served during this time, and a hearing was set. I got to work collecting and documenting shit. I made pictures and spreadsheets and timelines with cross-references because fuck it, now they had my full attention. The paid versions of Truthfinder and Trello seriously got me through all this. In my spare time, I went to the nursing home and gave my dad 8x10 copies of the pictures of his dead dog, from every angle. Before court, I went to the police station nearby and told them I wanted to report an elder abuse crime. A white-collar detective came out and told me it was a domestic matter and that since Shorty had been POA, everything he had done was legal. And this was the day I got to teach a small-town detective about the fiduciary responsibilities of a POA. Thanks, Google. I handed him a copy of the statute with the applicable sections highlighted. Then I handed him a thick folder with bank statements, pictures of the haunted house and dead dog, a copy of my dad's credit report that showed he was tens and tens of thousands of dollars in debt, and a spreadsheet listing every cash withdrawal with a running total of the stolen amounts. The grand total was just over $130,000 in cash. That's not including the lost value of the house or the credit cards he opened and used. I told him he could keep that folder since it wasn't the only one I had. Then I told him I would wait for a case number, and I sat down. He came back about 30 minutes later and apologized, said I had a case, and gave me a case number. Then I headed over to the courthouse. This is the end. There were other people there, and I had to wait my turn. And while I was waiting, that stupid motherfucker schlepped his sloppy ass into the courtroom, by himself and obviously, literally, non-metaphorically, dirty. His shoes were untied, and that turned my giggle box over. Then it was our turn, and we stood up. The same judge asked me some questions, asked him some questions, and asked me if I had any proof. I had a very thick folder of it. The judge asked me if I had gone to the police. Well, yes, sir, I have. Do you have a case number? As a matter of fact, the order was granted, permanently and for life, but not before the judge halted proceedings and told Shorty he needed a lawyer. Someone told me that the courthouse would have a copy of my dad's DD-214, discharge papers. So while I was there, I got a copy of those, because why not? I also used my POA to take Shanty Wife off the deed to the house. That way, if my dad died and it went into probate, Shorty had no immediate claim. I also went and got copies of my dad's birth certificate and Shanty Wife's death certificate. Technically, stepchildren can't request that info, but the clerk who waited on me recognized my dad's name and told me she lost her virginity to my Uncle Alan in the 60s and went to my grandparents' funeral. So I got all the forms I wanted. Shanty Wife left my dad $50,000 in life insurance. About $35,000 of that was left since Shorty was spending my dad's money and not his mom's. So I opened an Ally account and transferred every penny over. Then I set up recurring transfers for the monthly deposits. At any given time, there was no more than $100 in his account. I also found a house flipper that paid me enough for the house to pay off his mortgage. That's the thing about probate. There's nothing to fight over if there's nothing there. And I made sure there was fucking nothing there. My dad died thinking he still owned a house. Speaking of which, this is about the time I found my dad's life insurance policies. They were up to date, and Shanty Wife was the beneficiary. My POA didn't allow me to change beneficiaries, but it allowed me to assign them. And since Shanty Wife was dead, there was technically no beneficiary. This is where the death certificates came in handy. I assigned my sister and me as beneficiaries. Irrevocable too, which means that the only way to change that is for my dad and me and my sister to agree to it. I kept my dad in the dark about all this. The only thing he ever really knew about was the restraining order and his dead dog. I found out that he had purchased the gravesite next to Shanty Wife and wanted to be buried next to her. That was just never going to fucking happen. I Googled national cemeteries and found out he qualified to be in one since he was a disabled Vietnam-era veteran. So I arranged for that instead. All the cherries on top. My dad died in June this year and I was there. He's buried in a national cemetery far away where no one will ever go visit him. The only obituary I ran was on the funeral home's website, and that only for insurance purposes. I wrote it as vague as possible. There was no service. His urn is purple, the color he hated most. I got a call in August from the prosecutor's office in my hometown. The lady on the other end is married to my first cousin because of course she is. That's how it fucking works there. Shorty was arrested just after midnight on July 1st, was still in jail and had been arraigned on felony elder abuse charges. He's facing 10 years in FBI prison. She told me not to expect the trial to take up to 3 years for that to happen. I told her certainty will hopefully haunt him, and after all that, he's still got prison to look forward to. He lost his kids, he lost his dad. I'm spending his mom's cancer money. He lost his free house and trucks. He has no credit and will never be able to get any sort of decent job and will, hopefully for a long time, not be able to find a decent place to live. And I sleep like a fucking baby. The revenge was brutal and destroyer. It was satisfying to see Shorty losing everything. His home, vehicles, income, and even his children. The next story is from Evil Tess Marker. The results of my yard work. I posted this in another subreddit, but it was suggested I also try it here. So here it is. First, let me say that I am not 100% certain this is pro-revenge, because I don't necessarily think of myself in that league. I live in a consolidated county. That means that the city and county governments merged some years back, ostensibly to reduce administrative and infrastructure costs. This is important because services like fire, police, utilities, and trash pickup are now managed by former county officials and not the city officials. Many of these services are also much more inefficient, and some services have been outsourced to private companies. My municipality outsourced trash and yard waste pickup a few years ago, and the two companies who now do those collections are woefully inadequate, and their services cost more than when the city or county did it. They both have similar sets of rules what can be put out for collection, take fewer types of waste away, and no longer come 2 days a week as the city once did, but now only come 1 day a week. We're all paying more money for less service. Now that the background is done, here's the story. I did some yard work over the course of a couple of weekends last summer, cutting some limbs, trimming some shrubbery, and cutting down a dead tree in my backyard. Knowing what the rules are for how much yard waste, limbs, leaves and such can be put out, I bagged everything that was supposed to be bagged, filling up 3 of them. Things like leaves and small clippings, weeds and such. The paper bags for yard waste from the big box home improvement stores are what they require, so I use those. I just fill them halfway up so as to not make them too heavy for the waste collectors, even though there are no written weight restrictions. However, if a bag is too full, they will knock it over to spill out the contents so they then don't have to pick it up. I cut the larger limbs down to under 4 feet in length, or they wouldn't be picked up. Anything at all they can do to get out of picking something up, they will do. And they almost always leave a horrendous mess behind when they do pick things up. The pile put out for collection is not allowed to be any wider than 10 feet, nor any deeper or higher than 5 feet, nor may it contain any piece longer than 4 feet. All bags must be placed in a row, no more than 3 feet away from the limb pile. My pile was maybe 4 inches longer than the 10 feet, and only because of the tiny ends of the limbs, smaller than a toothpick, hanging out of the pile. The pile was no higher than 3 feet and no deeper than 4 feet. In other words, it fell within the size limits, except for a few twigs with leaves. I also had the 3 bags, each about half full of clippings and leaves, all lined up exactly as required and about 2 feet away from the main pile. They were scheduled to come on a Tuesday, but when I got home from work that afternoon, it was all still there. There was a pre-printed notice on my door that my pickup exceeded the prescribed size limits, and the note said that I would be required to either pay a $250 oversized load fee or reduce the size of the pile by half to make it fit into the limit. This is where the revenge comes in. I had the next 2 days off, so the next morning, bright and early, I got out the hedge trimmers. I trimmed the ends of the pile back to exactly 9 feet in length. After carefully laying those trimmed bits on top of the pile, I went to the backyard, where the limbs I had not trimmed up the week before were stacked for the following week's pile, and found 4 long, fairly straight limbs. I removed all the smaller limbs and leaves from these limbs, ending up with 4 moderately straight poles, each about 7 feet long. I marked 1-foot intervals on each pole in fluorescent orange paint and stuck them in the ground, out at the curb in the front yard, at the corners of a rectangle exactly 5 feet wide and 10 feet long. Got out the surveyor's tape, bright pink plastic tape used to mark property corners, and tied it onto and around the stakes at the height of 5 feet. This established a visual outline of the volume I was required to stay within. I made absolutely sure that everything in the pile was completely inside the poles and below 5 feet in height. This required adding almost 2/3 of the remaining pile in the backyard to the stack out front. To bring it up to 4 feet 6 inches in width, 4 feet 6 inches in depth, and 9 feet 6 inches in length, and no pieces longer than 46 inches. The pile was almost twice as much material as before. This included some small logs, up to $4 in diameter, also each 46 long. The limit is 5 diameter. All within the limits of 5x5EX10, the waste company mandates. So I carried each of the 3 bags of clippings to the backyard and filled each of them up as much as possible, while still being able to fold over the tops and staple shut each bag. I also included small 8 to 10 sections of the ends of larger limbs for added weight. The bags were now completely filled and weighed more than twice what they had before. I had to use the hand truck to get them out to the curb. They were so heavy. Oh, and all the extra clippings I generated filled up 2 more bags, so the total was now 5 bags. The company limit. I then went inside, called the company, and very nicely asked that they come to pick up my yard waste, since they had not done so on Tuesday. They agreed to send out a truck and crew and told me I would have to pay the fee. "Come on then," I told them. They soon arrived and happened to be the same crew that normally comes to my neighbourhood. I pulled a 25-foot Stanley tape measure from my pocket and asked them to measure the poles to confirm that the space was within the required limits. They did so and agreed the pile was not oversized and proceeded to spend the next 2 hours manually loading it all onto their truck. Oh, and it took both of them to manhandle each of those bags into the back of the truck too. I told them, very nicely and with a smile, that I knew what 10 feet was, pointed to the fence where it was marked with orange electrical tape, and thanked them for coming to pick up my yard waste. The 2 tired, sweaty waste disposal guys just groaned, got in their truck, and drove off. There was no extra fee added to my bill for that month. Never has been since. Now, I know they got paid for their time, and I know that I had to do a lot of extra work on my day off, but since last July, I have not once ever had them leave so much as a single leaf on the ground in front of my house. They had to actually do some hard work, with me standing there in shorts, smiling and drinking cold Gatorade while they were sweating. The story was interesting, but it is not really a revenge, not at least a pro-revenge. By the way, OP made the municipal company do their work correctly. Our next story is from Son Don't Play. Don't want to let me tinker? AL rightly then, let's do business then. My grandpa was a successful man, and in his mid-60s, he decided he wanted to take a step back, so he started selling off his businesses. He sold his various businesses and spent the next few years traveling. As he approached 70, he got bored in addition to a few new grandchildren, so he needed a bigger house. He sold the old home that he had bought after he got back from Vietnam and bought this massive house on this large piece of land. This property also came with a massive steel barn. Looked like this. Not sure if he had ever told anyone about his plans. But right after he got the property, he dumped a ton of money into tools and equipment and converted his barn into a mechanic's dream. Some things I remember having. He had a professional lift, capable of lifting full-size trucks. He had those professional oil catchers you see at Quick Lubes. He had a dedicated air compressor system that was designed to power all his power tools. He had a tire machine to mount new tires. He had so much equipment. His tool corner was a massive corner of this massive barn. His plan? To fix cars, especially for people in need. He lived in a rural community if you didn't have a car that was a big problem. So he let everyone know at his local church that he was willing to work on their cars if they provided the parts. He only took a few jobs a week. He was doing this to enjoy himself and help those that needed it. He'd of course change oil, change the transmission fluid, and all kinds of various repairs. My grandpa was a talented mechanic. However, he kept the amount of work limited. He was also selective. If you were in need, he'd want to fix your cars. If you had the means to pay, he'd decline and ask you to go elsewhere. One day, the owner of the local car dealership came by and told my grandpa he needed to stop fixing other people's cars because he wasn't properly licensed, didn't have the proper insurances, and was hurting his business. My grandpa explained this is just his hobby. He only does a few cars a week. The owner told him he needs to cut it out, or he's going to sue my grandpa out of business. My grandpa said he laughed over this. What business was this guy going to sue him out of? The owner walked out. A little while later, my grandpa got served. He was being sued by the owner of the car dealership. My grandpa thought he'd take a trip down to the dealership and try and reason with the man. My grandpa hoped he could come to an understanding. My grandpa spoke to the owner and basically explained, he only works on people cars who are down on their luck. The fact is, the people cars he fixes probably couldn't afford to pay a professional dealership to fix their vehicle. He only does a few cars a week. He's not all that interested in getting into a fight over his hobby, but he is not going back down. Well, they ended up in court. By this point, my grandpa had hired a lawyer who was able to get the city to approve a commercial garage on his property. It helped that he lived on the outskirts of town and had 6 acres of property. The court told my grandpa his auto repair shop is operating illegally. If my grandpa wants to continue, he's going to need to get a business license, get the proper insurances, and if he does that, he will be good to go. Now, what do you think a man who has nothing but time and money in this situation is going to do? He's going to get his business license and insurances, of course, which he did, and that surprised no one. But he went further. Got a dedicated phone line ran into his shop, hired a full-time mechanic, put up a professional sign, set up a little waiting area with a water cooler. What shocked everyone even more? He ran a local TV ad saying he was a pay-what-you-can mechanic shop, reservations only. Put ads in the local paper saying the same thing. Yes, folks, that's right. My grandpa is not only a licensed, legal auto repair business, he has a certified mechanic on his payroll, and he's running ads. As for his prices, they were quite simple you either. Bring the parts yourself and pay the mechanic whatever you wanted. Mechanic got a separate wage from my grandpa, so if you couldn't pay anything, that was fine. Had my grandpa sourced the parts, he'd charge at your parts and you'd pay the mechanic whatever you want. My grandpa started taking jobs, and boy did that shop gets busy. It was impossible to beat Grandpa's price. Grandpa was essentially paying to fix your car for you. My grandpa would spend his days with the mechanic that he had hired working on cars. He loved it. The owner of the local car dealership was furious. He sued my grandpa again. They went to court, and the judge basically said, my grandpa owned a licensed, insured auto repair business. What he charges his customers for his services is completely up to him, even if that means doing the work for free. About a year or so later, my grandpa gets a call from a lawyer who says he's representing a potential buyer of the local car dealership. However, the buyer wants to speak to my grandpa. My grandpa agreed. He sat down with the new potential buyer who expressed his concerns about buying the dealership. Service is a major profit center for a dealership, and he's considering buying the local dealership. However, he doesn't want to buy the dealership if my grandpa is going to keep operating the way he is, because it's impossible for a for-profit business to compete against someone selling their services for free. My grandpa agrees that there's no way someone looking to make a profitable business could ever compete against him. So they came to an agreement. The owner buys the dealership, and my grandpa would only work on a few cars a week, maybe 5, 6. Only work on people cars who are down on their luck and probably too poor to be able to pay a professional dealership to fix their car. Any parts he needs, he will buy from the dealership. Any work he declined, he'd refer to the dealership. The new owner of the dealership agreed to. Dealership must agree to let my grandpa be. Stay out of his way. Dealership must hire his mechanic. They shook hands, the local dealership was bought out, and for the next 9 years, my grandpa would fix people's cars who were down on their luck. If he had to buy parts, he'd buy from the dealership. And as for that mechanic my grandpa hired, he ended up becoming the service manager and did quite well for himself. As for my grandpa, when he was 80, he had a heart attack in his shop. Luckily, one of his grandkids was there, and they got him to the hospital, and he made a full recovery. But the doctor told him his body couldn't handle working in that garage anymore. He ended up shutting down after that. For the next 3 years, he looked out his kitchen window, staring at his shop, remembering all the fun he had in his garage. He passed away at 83, surrounded by friends and family. TL. Dr. Grandpa just wanted to fix some cars. The local dealership got mad at him because he was crushing them, sued him. My grandpa got serious, put them out of business, and made a deal with the new owner of the dealership that he would still operate, but at a level that the owner could still make a profit so long as they let my grandpa be. The revenge was really epic, and I would give Grandpa the title of the father of pay-what-you-can services. The grandpa did a wonderful job by offering this service and driving the dealership out of the business. The next story from Arnott. I got you a souvenir. Yeah, I got you fired from the post office. Edit TLDR at end with some comments. Background. Sit back and enjoy a story about some revenge I achieved at the US Postal Service back in the 1990s that cost a bullying full-time carrier his union job. In summer of 1991, I found a summer job as a casual carrier for the USPS. They used to hire summer temps to cover for all the full-time carriers who mostly took their vacations in the summer. The USPS has rules that things had to be delivered within certain time windows. People could get fired if they took too long to do tasks. Carriers were both openly and secretly monitored and timed on tasks, and we had the first computerized time system I ever saw. They would be secretly followed a few times per year to be sure they were working hard the entire time they were outside the post office. The post office building even had secret back hallways, passive sound monitoring, and hidden raised viewing areas where they could see the sorting floor unobserved. Cameras and microphones were hell expensive back then, so this was all done using tricky architecture and the eyes and ears of the postal inspectors. We were supposed to walk over and punch in and out of tasks so that they could track productivity to the second. People walking a delivery route were expected to do it fast, and better routes went to faster carriers. Slow carriers got mercilessly hassled to be faster and were disciplined for slowness. Look at Newman on Seinfeld. Going postal, due to overwork, was not really a joke there because people would flip out and murder their bosses. I hear it's worse now with GPS. Pre-internet, there used to be a huge volume of mail that got shuffled around the country every day. Quantities of mail that you would find hard to believe compared to what we see now. I was a broke college student home for the summer and was willing to work any hours they gave me, so the supervisors liked me. I was also very friendly with most of the full-time FT carriers because I was a good worker and didn't rock the boat. Also, for other reasons that you'll see below. I'm a fairly big guy, 6'5", or about 195 flilin, about 210 lbs back then, and I could carry a lot of weight, so that also made management happy. I was also in my early 20s with long legs, so I could move fast, carrying a lot of weight. Sorting mail back then was labor-intensive and took a lot of time to learn. I had a regular route that I would deliver in the afternoons that was sorted by a regular. I would usually do oddball delivery stuff in the mornings, help move heavy things around, do special deliveries, etc. I would also deliver for FT carriers that went on vacation or whose T6 was on vacation. Side note, mail delivery is 6x per week, but FT carriers only work 5 days per week. The T6 is a FT carrier who did the 6th day for 5 routes. That way, it worked out that everyone only worked 5 days per week. At the time, a lot of retail catalogues were mailed to houses. A lot of them. Some were substantially bigger than current magazines. We also delivered magazines, ads, packages, and samples. A lot of companies would mail free samples of products like laundry detergent, shampoo, and other liquids to be delivered to every house on the route. These were the bane of the carrier's existence because they were bulky and heavy. This slows you down and is physically taxing. Usually, carriers would divide the very heavy stuff up and deliver it throughout the week. On to the revenge. I was assigned to do the T6 work for Dave, name changed, for a few months. Fucking Dave. Picture a failed physical education teacher in his 40s. Bad moustache, about 5'7", wore knockoff sunglasses like Magnum PIs, and had an opinion about everything. Dave learns he has me as his T6 and decides he will leave all of the heavy stuff for me. So once a week, I got confronted with the entire week's worth of heavy mail for this a-hole's route. I confronted him about it and he basically laughed and said there was nothing I could do about it. The other FT carriers didn't like Dave much, but I was a temp and he was there permanently, so I was encouraged to just suck it up. I went to our boss and escalated to our postmaster, but was told that he was FT and I was a temp, so I just had to deal with it. If the mail needed to be delivered that day to meet the deadline, I had to make it happen. The postmaster's exact words were, "Just deliver every piece of mail for the route as fast as you can and don't worry about the time it takes or anything else. You're making huge OT on this route." They did talk to Dave and the most egregious stuff stopped, but I was still doing most of the hard work on this route. I mentioned earlier that everyone was always on the clock and tracked. In my first week, some of the nicer people took me aside at the beginning of the summer and made it clear to me that I was not to move quickly when delivering FT carriers' routes because it could make them look bad and cause trouble for them. As a temp, I should always take longer than the FT carriers because 1, my job was limited and the USPS did not really track temps closely. 2, I had zero experience, so everything should take me longer. 3, this was a union shop and they would hate to have to kick my butt for messing up their jobs. And 4, most of these people were awesome and I wanted to be a team player. So I was incentivized to move slowly and not make the FT people look bad. Side note, I am very pro-union and pro-labor, so this is not intended to knock unions, but the context is needed. I decided to wreck Dave's job since he was such a bullying little tool. I requisitioned 2 additional mail carrier bags. These are the over-the-shoulder satchels you see all the time. I was asked why, and I specifically told them it was to be able to carry all of the heavy items on Dave's route without having to keep going back to my Jeep to reload along the way. The postmaster personally approved it. After doing Dave's route 1 to 3 times per week, he called in sick a lot too, for a few weeks, I knew if very well and was staying on top of the heavy stuff. Once I was comfortable with the route, I started running it. I would literally load up 3 mail bags for each segment of the route and jog or run his entire route. Dave's route took him about 4.5 hours per day to walk. This was probably accurate for him, and he'd been on the route for several years. I would finish it in 3 hours or less. Every day, rain or shine. No matter how many magazines, samples or packages were waiting. No one really noticed I was coming back so quickly and punching back out of delivering his route when I was only doing it a few times per week. I would come back, pick up other work, and get that done. The fun started when Dave took a 2-week vacation and I handled his route 6 days per week. Since I was doing the work right, there was never a backlog of heavy items landing on me once per week. This made it even easier to jog or run his route, as I was back to using one mailbag, and fast walking jogging was enough to get it done quickly. I frequently got it done in under 3 hours and never took longer than about 3.5 hours. My personal best was under 2.5 hours. I got pulled aside by my supervisor and the postmaster after the first week. They asked me about my timekeeping practices, and I confirmed that I was doing things correctly. I would punch into his route on departure, keep the appropriate logs, and punch back in when I got back. The postmaster then asked me about Dave's route. I played completely dumb. He noted that I complained about the mail volume several weeks ago and that I used to take 6, 7, or more hours to get it delivered. I explained that I was spreading the heavy deliveries out over the whole week and that had really made a difference. He asked me if I was really delivering all the mail and whether I was hiding or throwing away mail. A serious problem if true. I got very offended and told him I delivered every piece of mail for the route, every day. Then I dropped the bomb. I told him I was having trouble understanding why this route was budgeted 4.5 hours to deliver, when it clearly could be done much faster than that. I pointed out that it was a lot of dense multifamily housing, which means less walking. I told him lots of people on the route seemed surprised that I did not want a soda pop or to sit down and talk for a minute like Dave always did with them. Pure lies. All in my innocent, gosh, I want to help the USPS voice. I told the postmaster that I was delivering all the mail as fast as I could and not worrying about anything else. I jogged the route again for the next 6 days and kept getting it done in much less time than Dave. Dave did not know about any of this. He made a point of finding me on his first day back to ask how I enjoyed doing all the hard work for him while he was vacationing. I told him I'd learned a lesson about how to treat your co-workers. He laughed at me and went back to sorting mail. He came back a few minutes later and said he got me a souvenir. He then pulled his middle finger out of his pocket. Classic Dave. That was my last week at the USPS, and I headed back to college. I kept in touch with some of the friends I'd made there, and one of them was very happy to tell me that Dave was fired about 2 months after I left. Due to the massive discrepancy in how long it took me and him to deliver the route, the higher-ups audited his route and discovered that he actually was lollygagging, taking unauthorized breaks, and apparently having an affair with a woman on his route. All on the clock. I, on the other hand, was in great physical shape after all that running and had pockets full of cash for that semester. His regular T6 also got most of the heavy stuff dumped on her, so she didn't get into any trouble for her delivery times because she was swamped with heavy mail on her day. She actually bid for and got the route full-time when Dave was shown the door. I have more stories of my glorious summer at the USPS, but crushing Dave is one of the high points. Edit TLDR. Worked at USPS for a summer. Co-worker who liked to pick on temps gets fired after I make it look like he's not doing his job right. And it turns out he really isn't doing his job right. Thanks for all the comments and awards. I didn't think a 30-year-old story about a summer job would be such a hit. For those saying that I could have handled this better, you're right. But this is pro-revenge, not followed the rule book. Also, Dave was an AH to all the temps, not just me. He just chose me as his special whipping boy for that summer, and I decided not to grin and bear it. The revenge was really satisfying and cool. OP did a wonderful job by exposing the reality of his bully and getting him fired. Dave's unauthorized breaks and slacking off finally cost him his job and, of course, reputation. The revenge was really satisfying. The next story is from Reddit admin dumb 87. I'll come back so long as Larry isn't there. Got permission to share this from my buddy who is a software engineer. Background. To give you some background on my friend Tim, made up name, he has been programming since he was like 7 years old. Tim said by the time he got to college, he breezed through most of his comp sci classes because a lot of the content they were covering he had already mastered years prior. Tim is an excellent programmer. Tim's career has been quite successful. He's worked for Google, Facebook, Amazon, and finally a hedge fund. The story starts at the hedge fund. Tim works a lot with AI technology, and at this hedge fund, he was the lead programmer manager who spearheaded an effort to optimize their AI that helped them complete literally millions of trades a day. To say his work had a massive impact was an understatement. All of this is going on with COVID-19 in the background. Due to COVID-19, they went to a work-from-home model, where my friend Tim kept working. During the work from home, Tim was looking around his fancy $4,500 NYC apartment and wished for things like a yard, a heated pool, a nice 3-car garage, and not living in a high-rise. It dawned on Tim that he could leave NYC. Tim moves to Michigan. So Tim moved back to his hometown in Michigan, where he bought himself a really nice home with a heated pool, a 3-car garage, a nice yard, and guess what the yard had in it? A mother-in-love suite, which was essentially a 2-bedroom, 1-bath, second home on the property of his main home, which he turned into his man cave. It's actually pretty sick. Oh yay, and his mortgage payment was far less than his $4.5K a month rent. Like half. Tim spent the rest of his COVID-19 work from home pounding out projects, etc. He never actually informed his employer on an official basis he moved. He just kept working. Then COVID-19 ended. COVID-19 is finally over. Back to the office? Or? Tim boss, Larry calls him up and goes, "All right, Tim, on Monday, we are starting work back at the office." And Tim goes, "Yeah, about that, I moved to Michigan." Larry is shocked and goes, "You didn't even ask if you could do that?" And Tim basically said, "I didn't know I needed your permission to move," in a sarcastic as fuck way. Larry insists that Tim needs to move back to NYC or he won't have a place on the team. Tim says he's been doing the exact same work from home at a high level for the past year. He's willing to travel to NYC for a few meetings a year on his own dime, but he feels his quality of life is so much higher outside of NYC, he has no desire to live in NYC. To which Larry said, if Tim doesn't have any desire to live in NYC, then he has no desire to keep Tim employed. Now, dear Reddit, what do you think a talented senior programmer with over a decade of experience who specializes in AI technology is going to say to a response like that? If you are thinking he quit, you'd be absolutely right, he quit. Maintaining complex code can be hard. Now, anyone that has done any programming knows that sometimes the best person to maintain the code is the person who wrote the code. There's logic, there's thought processes, there's so much that goes into programming that can be so individualistic, it can be hard for someone to take over a code base they didn't write. John, CEO, enters the picture. 6 weeks goes by when John calls Tim. John is the CEO of the hedge fund. John gets Tim to agree to consider coming back, so that's when John suggests they fly Tim to NYC, and he sits down with John. Tim, however, flipped the switch and said, "No, how about you fly out to Michigan and we discuss this?" Tim said he said that because he wanted to establish if he was going to come back, it was going to be him. Working from Michigan, and if he was going to talk his employment, it was going to be done in Michigan. John agreed, and 2 days later flew out to meet with Tim. Tim sits down and John says they really need him because he provided a lot of value to the organization and the programming team is struggling. John offers Tim the opportunity to come back with a 20% pay cut, since he won't be living in NYC, and John called that a cost of living adjustment. To which John said, "No, I want a 15% raise above what I was earning." John sits back and responds, "The reason we pay what we pay is because we ask you to live in NYC, and we understand that's an expensive city to live in." To which Tim says, "You pay what you pay, and you pay it because I am worth it." If I wasn't worth what you pay, you wouldn't be paying me. Now my first condition is, if you want me back, it'll be a 15% raise. John goes, and second? The second condition is I'll come back so long as Larry isn't there. John sighs, you're asking for too much? To which Tim goes, you don't need to bring me back if you don't want to. I'll be fine elsewhere. John goes, I'll talk to the partners. Tim says, my offer is good till Friday. John goes, what do you mean? Tim says, next Monday is when I'm going to start looking for work. This offer is good until Friday. It was Tuesday. John leaves. That Thursday, the phone rings. It's John. In conclusion, Tim, we are transferring Larry to a different fund. He won't be working with you anymore, and we are fine with giving you a 15% raise. Can we send you an offer letter for you to sign? Tim said, of course, and Larry is really gone? John goes, yes, you will never need to interact with Larry ever again. That was at the start of this year. Tim hasn't been in NYC, hasn't heard from Larry, hasn't seen Larry on any communications, etc. The revenge was brutal and executed masterfully. OP destroyed the career of manager John, who disrespected OP. Not only this, he also got a 15% raise and respect in the company, and all this on his own terms. On the other hand, the manager lost everything. The next story is from Switch SCE to Aux. Screw me on my bonus? Make me do two job? Enjoy the backwater you earned. I apologize for the length of this in advance. This happened some years ago, but still seems relevant today, so I thought I would share the story. So back in the 90s, I was working for a European-based financial firm. US offices were managed by Europeans with a regional head office in New York. Younger employees were generally underpaid/overworked. As in your first few years out of college, the promised reward was being promoted to a director position where the salary, perks, and bonus structure would really kick in. Kind of like how law firms promote their younger lawyers to partners after a long wait. As junior associates, the only good news was that we received the same 5 weeks of vacation per year, plus a few weeks of sick leave, as our European counterparts, which for me meant a lot of camping and staycations during the summer, since I didn't really make enough to travel to exotic, jarred, expensive locations. The offices were set up in a way where the business development, BD, directors each had a junior associate. The BD guys would generally network, schmooze, and travel around their territories to meet clients and new prospects. Once back in the office, the BD guys would dump their meeting notes on the desks of their junior associates to follow up and land the business, aka a Hunter-Skinner model. As a junior associate, I was pretty busy assisting a BD, so I routinely rolled over at least 2 weeks of vacation every year. I had worked at the firm for 3 years and was starting to get antsy for a promotion. Right after Thanksgiving, my boss in the West Coast office told me that I was being transferred and promoted to the Southeast office come the new year. I really had no interest in living in the Southeast, but I wanted to advance my career. I rolled over my usual 2 weeks of vacation into the next year, so I was eligible for 7 weeks of vacation that next year. After celebrating New Year's with my family in CA, I packed up my car and drove across the country. Once in the new office, I settled in and met my new boss, who promptly informed me that he wasn't actually promoting me to director, though I was being given the responsibilities of the role, as he judged me to be too young, but was also told that if I demonstrated that I could do the job, I would be promoted next year. I was pissed, but didn't have a choice other than moving back home and starting from scratch. So I agreed to it. I disliked my new boss instantly, as co-workers told me he was flaunting his management perks, which consisted of large allowances for housing and automobiles, which were paid for by sales production from employees like myself. Turned out he was related to a serving member of the board of directors back in Europe, which is how he got the job as a regional manager. Everyone knew he didn't have the skills to do our job, so he just collected fat checks, went to expensive restaurants with friends, and billed it to the company as client development, all the while leasing a new Mercedes every 2 years on the company's dime, while generally being a dick to everyone who worked for him. During the first week, I also met my junior associate, Jeremy. We sat down and discussed some accounts that I'd inherited that were in backwater locations none of the other directors wanted to visit. Jeremy was professional, but I got the distinct impression Jeremy hated me, though I didn't know why. I started traveling around to meet my clients and prospects over the next few weeks, usually spending at least 3 or 4 days on the road, back in the office on Fridays to go over follow-ups on business leads with Jeremy and execute whatever paperwork needed to be taken care of. About a month later, I returned from one of my trips and learned that Jeremy had quit. It turned out that he was mad that he'd been passed over for the position that I'd been given. I couldn't fault him, as I probably would have done the same thing. I asked my manager to hire someone else to back me up, but he was hesitant to do so, reasoning that my client portfolio was just starting out so I could do both roles until it made sense to staff up. I pointed out that it would be hard to be an effective business development officer if I had no support system to help grow my client portfolio, but he chose not to listen, knowing that I had little recourse but to shut the hell up. I spent the rest of the year working my ass off. This was right before email and internet were common, so executing business on the road was hard. Fax machines were the bane of my existence. Even though laptops were reserved for directors, my boss was kind enough, heavy sarcasm, to let me use a company laptop on which I would handle all of the paperwork to process client business from hotel business centers late at night or early in the morning. So I learned to live on 5 hours of sleep, or to sleep on planes whenever I could. After dealing with problems from some irate clients, I eventually paid for my own personal cell phone. Not everyone had them in the mid-90s, and our directors had just started getting company-paid phones that year, as I had to handle customers from the road. I just gave my personal cell number for clients to call so I could handle problems from the road. I landed a few big clients by a combination of luck and hard work, and got some solid referrals, which led to more referrals, so within a few months, I was gaining some serious momentum. Since I didn't have an associate to help me, that meant I spent the weekends and late nights back at the office handling paperwork, then back on the road during the week. I was so busy working both sides of the job that by December of that year, I hadn't taken my mandatory 2 weeks of vacation. I had some new clients that needed to be handled by year end, so I was granted a vacation waiver, meaning that my 7 weeks of vacation would roll over into the next year, adding up to 12 weeks of vacation plus sick time for the coming year. It was a big hassle for HR to process the waiver, but since I had produced a lot of new business, my manager was all too happy to order it done. I wasn't upset about working through year end, though I flew back and forth to CA for Christmas on a 24-hour turnaround. I rationalized it, hoping that I would get paid the first big bonus of my career in a few months. At that time, European firms paid their bonuses in mid-April, while employees of US-based firms got their bonuses by end of January. If you were planning on switching jobs early in the new year, working at a European firm meant that sometimes you left money on the table, aka golden handcuffs, so the timing of switching firms was important. I continued to work at my frenetic pace through April, taking no vacation as I was bringing in more and more clients and digging myself out of paperwork when I wasn't on the road. In the new year, we had some meetings about scorecards and sales goals, and I let my office in some of the categories and was number 1 for overall production. Finally, in mid-April, my boss called me in and announced it was time to discuss my bonus annual review. I eagerly sat down, licking my chops because I was assuming my bonus would be equal to my base salary at least, if not double. He handed me a piece of paper, and it showed a number that was almost 90% less than I was expecting for my bonus. I literally laughed out loud and told him it was a little late for an April Fool's joke, but he wasn't smiling. He proceeded to tell me how proud he was of me, but that since I wasn't a director, the bonus that I received was the maximum amount he would give me, as there wasn't any more money in the budget. I sat there in shock for a while, then kept asking the same question in different ways. Basically, why did he screw me on my bonus? It was like talking to a brick wall. Despite pointing to the scorecard that showed me as the best producer in the office, all the while having no junior associate. He wasn't having it. I was crushed, but then asked him if he was promoting me to director since I had demonstrated that I could produce, hoping that title would be a gateway into the big payday the following year. He shook his head and replied, "Maybe next year if you prove this year wasn't a fluke." It was a gut punch. He also rationalized that while my review was positive, I had some flaws that I needed to work on, mainly that I didn't work very well in a team atmosphere. I reminded him that I was a team of one, so there wasn't anybody on my team to complain about me. A switch finally flipped in my brain as I realized I'd just gotten majorly screwed and there was no changing the outcome. I told him that I was feeling ill and would be taking some sick days, so I got up and left his office. Co-workers said I looked as white as a ghost as I walked out of his office, so they knew something was wrong. I forwarded my incoming calls to his extension, packed up my important papers in case I decided to never come back, then headed to my apartment in a complete rage. I called my family and told them that I needed to come home for some much-deserved vacation. So after drinking myself senseless for 48 hours and forwarding all my calls to voicemail, I called in to work the following Monday and told my boss I would be taking a vacation week. He was pretty angry about the short notice as he'd been dealing with my irate clients contacting him about their problems since I couldn't be reached, and he didn't have much of a clue as to how to handle the paperwork necessary to do the work, so other associates were now being called in to help handle my workload. I flew home and made a few calls to people I'd worked with, hoping for some job leads. I managed to grab a lunch with an old associate who had left the firm, and he gave me some ideas and contacts, so I spent the rest of my vacation looking for a new job. I knew the timing sucked so out of options, I went back to my job the following week. First day back, I looked at my HR data and realized that I still had 11 weeks of vacation to use that year, plus a few more weeks of sick leave. Around that time, there was a company-wide conference call to celebrate a big company milestone. I think the firm was 125 years old, but didn't care anymore. To celebrate the big anniversary, we were told we would be getting an extra week of vacation that year, meaning once again, I had 3 months of vacation in my account. As a high performer, I was also selected to spend a few weeks in New York during the summer and fall for some management training, so that meant additional time out of the office. The next month was a blur of looking at different vacations options for me to take that year. I had accrued a lot of hotel rental car points and frequent flyer miles during the past year of traveling around, so I spent my days in the office doing as little client work as I could get away with while spending the rest of my time on the phone with the frequent flyer hotel points customer service reps trying to squeeze as much vacation out of my miles and points as I could. By the end of May, I submitted my vacation requests, which detailed how I was going to take 3 months of vacation in the 7 remaining months of the year. I submitted the forms to HR, and within a day, my boss called me in to discuss my schedule as he realized I was basically going to be gone for almost 2 weeks out of every month for the rest of the year. I was wrapping my vacations around federal and bank holidays whenever I could manage it. He told me that he was rejecting my vacation schedule since there wasn't anybody to cover my clients in my absence. I asked him to call in the HR rep into his office to have his stance officially on record. He objected, but I said I wouldn't discuss such matters without an HR rep present. HR was called in, and my boss told HR he was rejecting my vacation schedule, but HR responded that I was legally entitled to take the vacation days, so he couldn't reject the request. I also told him that, henceforth, I wouldn't be handling any of my customers from my personal cell phone if I was out of the office, so I would be forwarding my work phone to his when I was on vacation or doing business development trips. Also told him I was going to Europe on 2 different trips and would be unable to be contacted since I didn't have a company-issued cell phone. He was pissed, but knew that unless he promoted me to director and issue me a cell phone, he couldn't do anything about my new stance. After that, I only did business development in areas where I liked to travel and, more importantly, vacation. Until that point, I had always said yes to any meetings in backwater locations if it represented a chance to land a new client. Having learned my lesson the hard way, I didn't want any new clients to begin with, and certainly none living in areas I didn't like to visit. trips to Florida became common. If I was traveling, I would typically spend Monday to Wednesday making very infrequent sales calls. Most of my schedule was falsified with fake prospects so I could spend afternoons playing golf or hanging out at hotel pools trolling for women my age. Then would take off Thursday and Friday with vacation sick days so I could hang out and have fun, using hotel points to extend my stays for free. Since I was still underpaid, I ate cheaply and learned to squeeze as much out of my trips for the least amount of money I could manage while still having fun. My boss was now irate with all of the customer calls coming to him, but he refused to hire an assistant for me, so I kept forwarding my line to his when I was out of office. Whenever I was back in the office, pretty infrequent at this point, he would routinely lambaste me with verbal warnings about poor performance reviews, but I would just shrug my shoulders and tell him that maybe he was right not to promote me to director, since I was such a disappointment. He was also pissed because he'd been commended for having such a high-producing office the year before, mostly courtesy of my efforts, and now he was getting a lot of heat from New York that his new client numbers were down. Since I had frequent flyer miles and hotel points, but not a lot of money, I backpacked through Europe on 2 different 2-week trips that summer and also took a number of vacations back home, diligently following up on job leads on the West Coast that I had cultivated whenever I was in the office. By October, I started to firm up some conversations with a prospective employer back in California and finally received a concrete job offer in mid-November. I waited until December 15th to inform my boss that I was quitting the firm and told him I would be using my 2 remaining weeks of vacation.sick leave so that my resignation was effective immediately. He was surprised that I didn't wait until April to leave, but I laughed, telling him I knew he was going to screw me on my bonus anyway, so the money wasn't worth waiting around for. He then asked me to stay through the end of January in order to give him enough time to hire and train an assistant or a replacement to handle my clients. I refused, noting that Jeremy had quit 20 months before, so he had plenty of time to prepare for this eventuality. As I was packing up my office and informing co-workers about my departure, I got a knock on my office door from the HR rep as he wanted to conduct an exit interview. He closed the door and I aired out all of my dirty laundry. I told HR the firm had lost me when my boss had screwed me on my bonus, repeating the story that there wasn't any money in the budget. The HR counterpart shook his head and laughed at my boss's stupidity, noting that since Jeremy had been an employee at the beginning of the year I'd arrived, his salary and bonus was actually in the budget for the whole year. As such, my boss could have allocated the amount that he would have paid Jeremy to my bonus, which probably would have kept me reasonably happy. Instead, he decided to screw me over. I moved back to California that week and started the new job the first week of January. 3 months into my new job, I got a call from a co-worker at my previous firm. He called to tell me that after I left, HR from the head office in New York came down early in the new year to interview my former co-workers. Apparently, my sudden departure had raised some eyebrows in New York as they viewed me as a rising star, and questions were asked why I left so abruptly. Apparently, other employees in my office had also gotten screwed in various ways. Lots of client development meal expenses were rejected for being too expensive by the guy who was routinely billing his meals with friends to the firm. So, after listening to all of the complaints, New York management decided to make some change years before he was due to be rotated back to Europe. Since he was related to a guy on the board, they couldn't fire him. So they reassigned my old boss to some backwater farm town. I couldn't pronounce the town, but was told it was the kind of place that doesn't provide perks like allowances for housing, accounts for expensive steak restaurants, or a new Mercedes. I started my own company 5 years back, and it's worked out pretty well. Even though I got screwed 25 years ago, I always think about that experience fondly, as I probably would have worked for a company like that for my entire life had I not been shown how companies and bosses will generally screw you over if given half a chance. It was eye-opening and put me on a path to eventually start my own firm. So for that, I'm forever grateful. I always think about that situation around New Year's to remind myself of how far I've come and for how not to treat my employees. Hopefully, some of you can benefit from my experience without all of the drama I went through. Happy New Year. TLDR. So busy at a new job that I didn't even have time to take a vacation. Boss screwed me on my bonus after I was the top producer, so I dumped my customers back into his lap and spent the rest of the year on fake sales calls or on vacation. Quit and eventually started my own company. The revenge was really strategic and destructive constructive. When the incompetent boss denied a bonus to OP exploited his vacation time and throwing workload on the boss, which exposed boss's incompetence, and he was transferred to an undesirable location, while OP erected a successful business soon after. The next story from Call Me Swelling Ton. I was fired for inadvertently stumbling on my boss's malfeasance. I used his obsession with golf and watches to get him fired. This was in the last throes of the analog mid-90s. Fax machines, FedEx, dial-up computing, and voicemail were the most common business tools. I was a young regional sales manager for a major branded consumer product. I covered the grocery class of trade in 11 western states. My division worked out of Chicago, and I had a home office on the West Coast. I had made my reputation by typically making my quota and keeping costs within budget. I would get reassigned to struggling markets, and more often than not, I would usually make my sales number. Nothing too fancy, I just figured where the best opportunities were and concentrated on them. In those days, we had something called Market Development Funds, MDF, or as we called it, Making Days Fun. In the time before such things were deemed illegal, it was money we could literally use for almost anything you could imagine. Wining and dining, sending buyers to the Super Bowl, taking them on market research trips. I once took 6 honchos for a weekend of fishing in Mexico. As long as you had the receipts and your boss knew, except in cases where they specifically asked not to know, we were free to spend money as we saw fit. This was old-school Mad Men-style slush funds, all tax-deductible. Typically, the MDF money was 2% of your total annual gross sales and was use it or lose it, meaning it had to be spent because it wouldn't roll over. I always had some left over. As a team player, I would let my boss, Sasquatch, know so he could use it. No big deal. Towards the end of the year, my weekly FedEx pack from the company started including sign-offs for payments to a supplier I had never heard of before. What was weird is they were for a demo company that wasn't one of my regional suppliers. If you've ever been offered a sample or a coupon in a grocery store, that was a demo company. I called the broker agent in that market and learned that they had never used the company, or even heard of them. I finally figured out that they were from Sasquatch and that he had thrown them in with my other sign-offs. I called him and asked if he knew what they were. He said that they should be assigned to my MDF and not to worry about them. This was a little unusual because demos would normally be taken out of other monies or came down from marketing. Whatever, I signed off on them. Hung out to dry. About 3 months later, I was called into HQ for a meeting where I was told I was being transferred to a market that I had never worked before and would be required to relocate. At the time, my wife was pregnant. Read her pro-revenge story in my feed. And we just started an extensive remodel on our newly purchased house. The company had some relocation benefits, but it was just too hectic to pull up roots and move to the southeast. I declined the offer and was told that I could look for another job within the company or receive a severance package. I wound up taking the severance. The truth comes to light. Several months later, one of my ex-co-workers told me that my region had been taken over by one of Sasquatch's past work associates who he managed to get hired in my spot, and that the region was tanking. Badly. Nothing made sense. Why was I terminated and then replaced by someone who lived in another city and who couldn't do the job? I started to think in my naivety that I may have put a target on my back. After some research and digging, which was much harder before the internet, I learned that the demo company billing the MDF was based in my ex-boss's previous city and was just a PO box, a telephone, and a DBA registered by the new person in my job. I found out it was his girlfriend, mistress. I was livid. Like most people, I tend to plan revenge in my head, but never really go through with it. Most of the time, it's a coping mechanism and not very useful in moving on past being wronged. But this was so egregious, so uncalled for, and so disruptive to my life that I felt I had to get even. My plan evolved to take this guy down, whatever the time it took, whatever the cost in lives or money. I was going to get this mofo. I may have been able to rat him out to the company, but they might have dismissed my complaint as coming from a disgruntled ex-employee with an axe to grind. The hook. I decided that I was going to approach Guy as a phony recruiter, not just a guy collecting resumes, but as a retained corporate headhunter, someone paid to onboard people for big jobs. I had spent a year early in my career working for a super exclusive headhunting firm and knew exactly what transpired in the process. My subterfuge required international telexes, phony letterhead, faked English accents, and overseas friends to do my bidding. Sasquatch was obsessed with expensive watches and golf. He played regularly and watched pro golf both on TV and live. He would incessantly chatter on about both subjects. To bait him, I arranged for him to be approached for an executive position with a major Swiss watch company, for a position tied to pro golf and other swanky sports sponsorships, and included a shopping list of benefits and perquisites. The job would require hobnobbing with major sports organisers, flying around the world, first class, notch, and basically spending money. It was a job he could only dream of. The setup. In the slow and methodical long con, I strung him along until the time was right to close with an offer. The only catch was that he had to report to Switzerland for final offer and onboarding. I deliberately scheduled it for the week of the old jobs division meetings and reporting. They were mandatory and impossible to miss without raising red flags. Sasquatch was worried that his absence would be impossible to cover, especially if he was out of the country. The headhunting firm said they could move the appointment up a few days so that he would be able to attend his meeting, but that he would need to purchase an unrestricted business class seat and make his own hotel reservations. Save your receipts, and the watch company will reimburse you, he was told. Sasquatch showed up to his swanky hotel suite, using his own credit card for the $2 room, and promptly received a note from the watch company that his appointment had to be rescheduled for the following Monday because of a major corporate crisis. Sasquatch called the phony recruiter in a panic about missing the corporate meetings back in the States. It was agreed that he would call in sick and that whatever happened with the old job, he was heading to much greener fairways. Ha 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 ha! Enjoy your weekend in Europe. By Monday, you'll be in your dream job. The sting! While Sasquatch was cooling his jets in Europe, I nonchalantly called his boss, the president of the division, and casually asked for a reference on Sasquatch's work ethic and dates of employment. You'd be surprised how often this mistake happens. The president, to his credit, didn't tip his hand or act very surprised by the call, but like a good corporate wonk, he referred me to human resources. I let it slip that he was in Europe finalizing his new job and that he'd already given the company notice. My bad. Bloody aftermath and how the revenge overstepped it is original mission. Eventually, I was able to put together the aftermath from old co-workers and other people in the trade who did not know I was the revenge ninja. When Monday came and went, Sasquatch must have been apoplectic. This is to be assumed since we had cut all communications to let him twist in the wind, because we received at least 20 calls to the exchange and multiple faxes. Sasquatch hung around the hotel for a day or two and then finally decided to leave for home. I assume at some point he may have contacted the watch company, but I never confirmed it. When he finally got home, he found his office had been packed up and left with his wife. An HR person met him off-site to give him his severance and retrieve the car and other company property. I heard his wife left him sometime later and his mistress was fired for theft. I figure he spent at least $10,000 on travel and hotel. Epilogue. I wish I could say I tipped my hand and told Sasquatch that I was the author of his demise, but it really served no purpose, and in theory may have exposed me to some retribution of my own. By my moral lodestar, I got even with a thief who was content to steal and take my livelihood. That was plenty. Sicilian Alzheimer's never forget an offence. Very humbled that this blew up. I have been accused of having a cold heart on those who have slighted me. I'm not too proud to admit there were some revenge plans that backfired or were never implemented. I'm an argumentative SOB and comfortable enough in my own skin to take a few random jabs and some healthy skepticism from Redditors. I defend myself in the hope that someone will learn that there are indeed times when revenge is appropriate. My real-world experiences came before the internet. Doxing, ghosting, texting, social media, Google, and all the other stuff that makes people sure everything is a scam. I've had some fun and memorable experiences in my life. The story of Sasquatch is true, and less complicated than you'd think. The key to any confidence scam, literally the word con comes from confidence, is the confidence the mark puts on the con artist. Sasquatch was a Swiss watch fanboy. He wore expensive models and knew everything there was to know about rare watches and their complications. Additionally, he lived for golf, played golf, watched golf, anything golf. So when my real recruiter friend from the UK called him and said, "My Swiss client is confidentially putting together a hospitality ambassador position in the US. We are looking for someone who knows golf and other sports, knows watches, and is comfortable with high-level interactions at a six-figure salary with a huge travel budget, car, and entertainment allowances, free or low-cost access to the best watches in the world, and a budget to set up a small team of minions." How hard do you think it would be for him to recruit Sasquatch? A few faxes from a third party, a phone call or two, and some cobbled-together letterhead, and the guy was hooked. If Sasquatch harbored any concerns that it was fake, he certainly would have refused to lay out travel expenses. I myself have fronted travel money while interviewing, so it really wasn't much of a reach. I'll say that revenge isn't always pleasant, and sometimes I think it feels a little sickening. These are the consequences of this type of action. As I age, I agree to a certain extent that living well is the best revenge, but only after someone pays for what they did. The revenge was really satisfying. OP's boss, Sasquatch, fired him after OP unknowingly uncovered his financial misconduct involving a fake demo company. To get revenge, OP posed as a headhunter offering Sasquatch a dream job with a Swiss watch company tied to pro golf. Sasquatch fell for the bait, spending thousands on travel only to miss important work meetings and get exposed. He was fired, his mistress lost her job, and his wife left him. The next very interesting story from to.storytime. Manager targeted me because of my family priorities. It cost her job, and many of high-ranking employees quit their job, leading to shutting down of the store. I have worked at a certain home improvement store for close to a decade now, about 8 years roughly. The first 7 was in NC before I moved up further north to be with my best friend and her husband, who I learned was pregnant with my first godchild. As such, I transferred up to a store in the area and put my nose to the grindstone. I worked garden before, and did that for some months before I started to be moved from department to department, as this store was low on staff. However, this was not full-time. My old HR had dropped the ball, and this store believed I wanted part-time. Having already moved, I grabbed a part-time overnight job at a gym to make ends meet, and continued to work, all the while asking repeatedly for full-time at the main job, and never getting a definitive word back or change. Several months into this, my goddaughter was born. As I lived with my friends during this time, and during the time of COVID, I spent quite a lot of time helping to raise her, and we became close. I would take time off, that I was allotted, to help look after her, and there was little problem. Half a year into this change, and I had made a good name for myself. I did not have a good deal of friends per se, but I was respected for my work ethic and willingness to help out anyone in any department that asked me. Enter a new assistant manager. The ASM was abrasive to staff and used to getting her way. The first I heard of her was when she outright fired a girl working the front desk because of a Playboy tag on a jacket. Myself and several other employees organized a walkout in protest of this, and succeeded in getting the store manager to reverse the decision made by the ASM. This was not our first walkout, having done this in the past when another ASM, the current's predecessor, made sexist comments about a cashier. Soon after this, I was given full time by the ops manager working in receiving for a cantankerous supervisor. We often did not get along, especially as my godchild got older, and I took on babysitting duties while her parents worked and slept. It was not something I minded as I adored the child. I often talked about her with my co-workers and loved to show pictures and stories. However, this was not something shared by my higher-ups. My supervisor was upset that I could not work overtime to help him, as we were the only two in receiving for the store, because of either my second job or babysitting. And soon after the second walkout, I was made aware of a rumor circulating around the store that the child was in fact my own daughter, that I had fathered outside of my friend's husband's knowledge. The source of the rumor was unknown, but my ASM had made disparaging remarks to me in the past about men taking care of children, so I had my theories. My holiday plans, asked off in advance as soon as our electronic system allowed, were cancelled without explanation, both Thanksgiving and Christmas. I had never missed a major holiday since I moved north, and I had asked the same days off the year prior and had gotten them off before the ASM arrived. Strike one. And soon after this, my supervisor, whom I work closely with every day, had a positive COVID test, forcing me, per company rules, to self-isolate until I could get a positive or negative test myself. During this week, as it took a full week to find a place with enough room to give tests thanks to Omicron, I was harassed repeatedly by text and phone call by both management and my supervisor to track down an at-home test and get back to work ASAP. All the while, I had to inform everyone I was in contact with, including my friends, family and roommates, that I had been exposed, risking their own holiday trips and plans. Strike two. Thankfully, my test was negative. A week after this, the Northeast gets slammed by a snow and ice storm. I drive a four-wheeled vehicle and so made it in, but near the end of my shift, I was made aware that my friend's husband had been injured and stranded in a car accident on the ice, and so left to get them home, and their car to a service station. To add to it all, they have lost power in their home, with an infant, leaving me with the only person they could turn to with a vehicle and power. I will admit, I had few sick hours left, but informed work that I would be out on a family emergency. For that week, I called out each day with ongoing family emergency, with snow and ice still coating the streets and power still down throughout our city. And every day, I was hounded by calls from management demanding I return to work regardless. This would have not only risked my own safety, but would have stranded my family at my apartment with no way to get supplies or get home once the power returned. Strike three. I was done. Early in the morning that following Sunday, I walked into work and placed my resignation letter on HR's desk. That is important latter. I had tendered it to be immediate, as I live in an at-will state. Was it petty? Yes, I will freely admit that. I had given 8 years of my life to this company and asked very little in return. As I was leaving, I crossed paths with my supervisor, who asked angrily if I was finally coming back to work. I informed him of my decision to leave, ignoring his provocations, and left to go home and sleep. Several hours later, I received the gift that would ignite my semi-accidental revenge. A single text from my ASM, "We will see how long you can take care of your love child without us." Well, seems I found my probable source. My friends had been made aware of this rumor from the start. I did not hide anything from them, and did not want any kind of rumor, however unlikely, to reach them from anyone but me. They are my closest friends and compatriots, and have given me the greatest gift in the form of my godchild, whom they insist I call my niece, as I am family. Love child feels like a slur against her, and I am not cool with that, and neither are they. However, they informed me of the monumental screw-up my, now former, ASM had made. It was time for corporate HR to be made aware, and so I began to compile my evidence. The texts from my supervisor, the call records and messages left, and this holy grail of a text message. If I was going to leave, I was at the very least going to give some blowback on the team that had been so willing to target me. What happened after is secondhand from friends I had still at the store, and so I cannot entirely verify all of it. But the ASM played herself. The following day, a meeting of management and supervisors was convened, where the ASM made it known that I had been fired, not self-terminated, for job abandonment and immorality. And unless I am grossly misinformed about the nature of American retail work, immorality is not a fireable event. To my supervisor's credit, he defended me to the ASM and was fired on the spot. The store's HR rep, having earlier gotten my printed termination letter on his desk, made it known that I had indeed not been fired, but left on my own. And the ASM attempted to fire him as well, in front of the staff. And from there, it spiraled. According to my source, entire departments began to walk out or outright quit, having had their own problems with the ASM. Appliances. Quit to a man. Garden left with their manager to work at a competitor's, as he had been working on this well before my saga began. Front desk walked out in protest, as it came out that the ASM had threatened and blackmailed several Muslim part-timers to not wear their headscarves if they wanted hours. Lumber, receiving's main partner, quit. Pro desk joined the front desk protest, as one of their number, a Sikh man, had also been threatened. Cashiers, both head cashiers, quit, and the other trained cashiers walked out with the desks. Ops manager had informed the district manager and quit outright before he arrived, walking out with the HR rep and my old supervisor. My source's last report of the ASM was seeing her sprinting to her car, after having heard that the district staff was inbound and the store manager was forced to shut the store down for the next 2 days, last I've heard. I've been in contact with the other injured parties, and we're compiling all the evidence we've collected as several of the families are hiring lawyers. I suspect the company will attempt to keep this quiet. I just never suspected that anything like this would happen. I have a full-time position at the gym upcoming, and I've been enjoying the extra sleep and time I get with my family. I'm never working 56, 64-hour weeks ever again, and I will never darken the doorstep of that store again. I hope my ASM enjoyed the temporary rush of power. I suspect she won't get it ever again, at least not in manager positions. TLDR, an assistant manager got on a power trip and harassed myself and several other employees, leading to her ultimate downfall and the biggest mass quitting I've ever been a part of. I've posted this in RR Anti-Work and R Regular Revenge, but it was voted there to also be pro-revenge, so posting it here. The revenge devastating. A false claim of the assistant manager not only ruined her reputation, but also ruined the business of the store when high-ranking employees of the store resigned en masse. Not only this, the assistant manager in the store may also have to face legal consequences. It was really a satisfying revenge. The very, very interesting pro-revenge story. My principal tried to get me fired, so I got her fired from the district. I was in my mid-20s, fresh out of grad school, and ready to start my teaching career. I got a job at a Title I elementary school near my home teaching art, and I was super excited that I could walk to work. However, I was so far into La La Land that I didn't notice any of the warning signs. Warning sign number 1. It was a week before school started, and I had called and emailed the school office staff and my principal to ask about getting my keys and badge so I can start seeing what I needed to do to get ready for the school year. No response and no answer from either. So I called the district office and asked when and where I could pick up my keys and badge. 2 days before school starts, I get an email from my admin that I should have been more patient and not have contacted the main office about my keys and badge. I finally got everything and was able to get into my room and was horrified with how much I had to get done. Apparently they had used my room as storage, so it was loaded with tables and desks stacked on top on each other, 8 filing cabinets, and well over 100 chairs stacked all around the room. I managed to clean out the space with help from my awesome custodian. Shout out to all custodians who are the secret backbones in helping teachers get ready for the school year. Hurdle number 1 finished. Warning sign number 2. It's now the day of classes starting, and I haven't been informed of what the schedules are, as in which days I see certain classes and when. So I email my principal, again, asking what the schedule looks like, and if there is a digital document that I can print out. I get an email back a few minutes later telling me to stop pressuring and bullying her. I replied, sorry if I was making her feel that way, but it would be nice to know what classes I had and when. This leads to warning sign number 3. It's 8:10 a.m., not 10 minutes after school started, and I finally get my schedule, only to find out that I have 2 classes at the same time. Note, my school isn't huge, but we still had 14 classes serving kinder 6th grades, so I was having at least 46 kids in one classroom by myself. Moreover, I had 7 45-minute periods a day and saw every class every day of the week, with only a 30-minute lunch. My lunch was when I was on lunch duty. I asked my principal if there was any way we could adjust the schedule, so I had time to plan and get the classroom ready for the next class and wouldn't lose instruction time getting things ready as the new class was coming in. I got yelled at by her with a class waiting outside saying it was my first year teaching and I didn't know what I needed and needed to just deal with it. Well, I decided not to just deal with it, and I read the teacher's contract for the district. Come to find out, we had a section about classroom size. It stipulated that if you had a class over 30 students, you get to have an educational assistant to help you with the class. I brought this up with my principal after a month and a half of struggling and was, you guessed it, denied and told there was no money in the budget and I would have to make do without it or quit. Mind you, I am stubborn and determined to make things work with what little I have. But things were rough. In order to prep and plan everything for the next day, make meaningful grades, keep up with referrals, and keep in contact with families. I was having to be at the school from 6 a.m. when the morning custodian arrived till 9 p.m. when the night janitor was leaving on weekdays, and then also use my weekend time to continue to plan and grade. When I came time for my first teacher evaluation, I was dreading it. However, I got all satisfactory mark from my principal. I was shocked. Little did I know this was a plan she had all along. A few more weeks go past, and I've had it. I talk with our union about the double classes and say, it's not sustainable, and a classroom my size can't safely fit more than 30 students, let alone 46 students. And they said they would handle it, and another few weeks go by and nothing. It's not the week of Thanksgiving, and conferences are over, and I get to not worry about anything for 2 days. So I decided to go to a potluck dinner with some old friends of mine. So here is the best part, and maybe the part that saved my career and even maybe my sanity. I was talking with one of an old acquaintance and his new husband about what teaching job I landed and how the school year was going. I let it slip that even though my students were amazing and had such creative minds, it's frustrating to me that I don't have the time to give to them that they deserve. And with 2 classes at once, it's hard to get around to everyone in the class in just 45 minutes. I noticed the husband raise his eyebrow and ask me what school I worked at. So I told him, what harm could it do? Ladies and gentlemen, and everyone in between, little did I know I was talking with my principal's supervisor. I found out the next Monday when my admin stormed into my room at 8:05 a.m. to scream and yell at me, threatening to fire me and make sure I never work in education again. I was shocked and confused at the time. However, later that week at our staff meeting, we talk about a change in the schedule and how only on class would be in my class at a time for an hour now, and I would only see them twice a week instead of all 5 days. It was magical. The kids were happier, I was calmed, was able to help each individual student if they needed it, and was able to plan enough throughout the day so I could leave at 4 p.m. Sad to say, my happiness didn't last forever. I noticed my principal stalking my room and coming in non-stop to observe me. It was awkward. I also had a few of my very extroverted students come in quiet and unable to focus on work. But when I asked them if everything was okay, they would burst into tears and say, I don't want you to go. Being confused, my response was always, oh student name, I have absolutely no intentions of going anywhere. "You are all the best students a teacher could ever ask for," which would cheer them up for a while, but then they would come in next week upset again. It all clicked when the day before we left for Christmas break, my principal came into my room with one of her minions, who was out building union representative, to tell me I was being put on a teacher support plan. This plan was to evaluate whether or not my contact with the district would be up for renewal at the end of the school year. I was shocked, and my union rep just snickered and walked away giggling with our admin. I felt sick and abused, unable to feel any emotion. It wasn't until I got home and read when this plan detailed was I seeing red. I had hit my breaking point. This is when I started to formulate a plan of revenge. Some things to note: our principal liked to come into school whenever they felt like. She would be there anywhere from 7:45 a.m., our actual contract hours, to as late as 9:30 a.m. She once showed up at noon without telling anyone. I also knew that she had kept revealing a certain after-school care contractor that wasn't free to families, but they got money from district to offer it for free. I also knew that this person running and after-school care was dating and living with our principal. So during winter break, my acquaintance and his husband called and asked if I free to get drinks over the holidays. I love a good cocktail, and I needed some hard liquor. When we met up, I wanted to talk about anything other than school stuff. I just wanted to keep my mind off of school drama. But the new husband brought up if things were better after he had talked about the double classes. That was when I found out that he was her boss. I asked, "What do you mean you talked to my principal? How do you know her?" New husband: "Oh, you didn't know? I'm the supervising administrator for that cohort of schools." My jaw dropped, and I started to hyperventilate. The husband was startled and asked what was wrong. So I told him. I told him everything. How she yelled and threatened to get me fired, how she put me on this support plan, and how she just kept observing my class without notifying me. His face went from a concerned look to surprised Pikachu face to red with anger. He told me, "I really always had a bad vibe from her, and always wondered why there were always so many new teachers at that school every year. What else can you tell me about what's going on?" I hesitated, tell him everything, but my acquaintance told me not to worry. He has seen this look before, and that we were on my side. So I told him everything I knew. They both just sat there, awestruck, unable to speak about what they were hearing. Anyway, after break is over, I am dreading coming back into my class, but I don't want to miss seeing my students. So I push on. I am walking in the hall to my mailbox, and I see a few my students that had cried and told me they didn't want me to leave. They ran up and gave me the biggest, longest hug ever, saying, "You're here! You're here!" Me: "Of course I'm here. I wouldn't leave the best students ever. Now would I?" Students: "But principal said you were going to leave us because you didn't want to be here, and we should give you trouble before you left." Me, trying to hold my rage: "Oh, maybe she talking about how I was leaving for visit family over the break. No need to worry, I'm still here." Yes, all this wretched woman tried to purposely make kids misbehave in my class to write me up for not having good rapport with my students. I was beyond livid. So next time I have class with that student, I ask them if they could make a comic book of the conversation they had with my principal when she told them I was leaving, and make an ending he wanted. Phase 1 started. Phase 2, I contacted my boss's boss and told him per my contract, I wanted another admin to accompany my principal's teacher support observations. And I wanted it to be him. He said absolutely, but not to tell my principal just yet. The first day of my observation comes, and she walks in without a notebook or anything to take any sort of notes, looking proud of herself like she is about to get away with firing me. She is shocked and confused when he bosses walks in with a laptop and sits next to her and starts typing notes about how I'm doing. She stumbles around and comes to ask me for a notepad to take notes, and I tell her, "I don't have an extra notepad, but I so have some poster paper. We were making movie poster of a movie we would star in to go without comic books." and that I hope you can be better prepared next observation as to not disrupt my class and take time away from their institutional time. He bosses just smirked. Phase 3, I was now calling my new best friend, her boss's boss, whenever she was late getting to school, and he would do a random stop by if he was close. So he was able to document that she was not showing up to work on time and not submitted the paperwork to have it be taken out of her leave minutes. Overall, we get he at least 2 times a week for a solid month. I think he even asked someone from HR to come to our school to see for herself at 9 a.m, and she still wasn't even there. Now time for phase 4, which was my favourite one. Getting the parents on board. I first started talking to a parent that seemed to always be late picking up their students. I would chat about it and they said it was hard to get there on time, and they often had to leave early. And when I told them about our aftercare, they would tell me that it costed too much for them. However, I would inform them that since we are a Title I school, that after-school care was free and paid for by the district, and gave her a nifty flyer I made up with the website to fill out the forms and which ones to fill out. This made word spread around to parents paying the contractors directly that it was supposed to be free. And boy, was that a fun PTA meeting to go to. I also made sure the principal knew it was me that informed the parents about that free after-school care program. After this, there were countless investigations at our school, with head administration from the central office stopping by our school. Auditors and our union finally got involved and tried to play the heroes, victims of this incident. The outcome. The second half of the year was very chill. My new best friend made sure that my teacher support plan was taken off my teaching record, and my principal was not allowed to do my second term evaluations, nor was she allowed to do any informal observations. The after-school care contractor was fired and taken over by one recommended by the district, and my students were making amazing strides in their posters and comics. At the end of the year, when we were getting our assignments, jobs for next year, my principal made one last attempt to get me to leave and told me, our budget doesn't have the funds for an art teacher next year, and that I might want to see employment elsewhere. I laughed in her face and said, nice try. My position is paid for by a state bond and isn't affected by your budget from the district. If there isn't anything else, I'll be leaving now. And walked out. I could hear her slam her desk and swear up a storm as I closed the door. At the end of the year, I had my one student share his comic book about how the principal told him to give me trouble in class at our school's talent show, leaving the already pissed off parents more pissed that an adult would tell a child to act in such a way. I even think she had a shoe thrown at her when she ran on stage to stop him from finishing his comic. To the surprise of no one, the last day of school she announced on the intercoms after students had left that she would be resigning from our school to move to a different position where she was needed and that she would miss almost all of us. I came to find out after stalking her on LinkedIn 2 years later that she had to get a job out of the district an hour drive away to get another admin job, but only stayed for a year and then had to step down to teaching English at a different school in another district the next year. And for those of you wondering how my student's comic book ended, well, the art hero rallied the students against the anger principal to make her see the errors of her ways, but the angry principal could not become happy, so she left and the power of happiness filled the school once again. The revenge was really epic. The teacher did a wonderful job by exposing principal's unethical actions with the help of parents and students. The final satisfactory blow came out when the principal resigned and left the district. It was really an amazing revenge. Kudos to the teacher. Don't mess with the teacher. A very interesting pro-revenge story from 327 Nova. My cousin stole loads of jewelry, so I stole his inheritance. I do not speak lawyer, so please forgive me. Backstory. 25 years ago, my aunt passed away when I was a baby, leaving my 2 cousins who were both in their early 20s alone to fend for themselves. My grandparents, who were very wealthy, put a clause in their will that grandkids will receive half of their share of inheritance if a parent passes before the children reach age 30, and then the other half when my grandparents eventually passed. Both my cousins received a very sizable inheritance coupled with the money they got from selling my aunt's house. The younger of the two paid off her college loans and was able to buy property. She still lives on the same plot of land. The older sibling blew all of his money. Straight out of a book of the Bible, within 6 years, he was back to living in a condo, working as a police officer. Everyone in our small family knew he had a substance issue, so he was barely making ends meet with his officer salary and buying copious amounts of drugs. The next 4 years, my cousin went to rehab 3 times, sponsored by my grandparents. He sobered up after getting his girlfriend, now wife, pregnant. Absolutely wretched woman. She saw my grandparents as payday and essentially baby-trapped my cousin thinking it was her ticket. Within 7 years, they had 3 kids, so she is locked in tight. She's a nurse, and with 3 kids around, they always needed a little boost. Guess who they would always ask? You got it, my grandparents. Being the kind spirits they are, they always landed a hand. My father, mother, sister, and I got sick of it very quickly. My grandmother unfortunately passed away when I was 17, leaving my grandpa as the last remaining. I was undoubtedly my grandfather's favourite among the grandkids, which left a real sore spot in the mouth of my cousin and his wife. I had 2 more years at home before college, so I lived with my grandpa to keep him company and help take care of him. My cousin and his wife hated this, so much so that whenever they came to visit and I was not home, they would send their 3 gremlins into my room to destroy it. My room had double doors, so it couldn't be locked. This was the start. The longer I lived there, the more they would mess with me. My cousin even went as far to place one of those little mechanical noisemakers in the cabinet in my room, the ones that play sounds at random intervals that make you think you're insane. Thankfully, my German Shepherd would always hear it, and after a week or so, she finally found it. They did this to distance me and deter me from taking care of Grandpa so they could swoop in and be the heroes. This continued until one of the kids found my gun. By this time, I was 18 and in the possession of a firearm. I use quotations because my grandfather has guns, but cannot aim and shoot them anymore due to arthritis and nerve degeneration, so when I moved in, he placed all the weapons in my hands should the need of self-defense arise. But should he see them out for any reason other than cleaning, there would be hell to raise. Being very well trained with guns and having a sense of pride in defending my home, I took this responsibility very seriously. I always kept a handgun in a locked container in my nightstand with the key on a high shelf out of reach from the gremlins. One fateful day, I am out getting my grandfather food when I come home, and my older cousin, his wife, and my grandfather are staring at a gun on the table. It was my gun that I kept in the lockbox. It was loaded and had a bullet chambered. I always keep a magazine in the lockbox, but never loaded into the gun. The lockbox was nowhere to be seen. My cousin claimed one of the children found the gun and was playing with it. I was 100% certain that he either found the key or broke the lockbox open to get to it and load it. As a 6-year-old would not be able to reach a key I could barely grab, figure out what it was to, load my gun, and chamber it. I tried my best to explain what my cousin had said was bullshit, and that I never keep my firearms loaded in the house. But my cousin, who is a cop, scolded me on gun safety and threatened to have me arrested if I didn't leave and hadn't arrested me yet. Because we're family. I was asked to collect my belongings and go back to my parents. My cousin had won, or so he thought. The next day, I apologized to Grandpa and explained to him there was no way one of the kids could have gotten the key. He agreed with me, and he apologized, but he thought it best I move out until things cool down. But once they do, I would be welcome back home. Our relationship was a little fractured due to disinformation provided by my cousin. A month later, my grandfather died of a heart attack at 86. I was devastated. I was just beginning to get back into rhythm with him and rebuilding the trust that was somewhat shattered. To this day, I am still unsure of what kind of man he saw me as due to my cousin. Immediately, my cousin and his wife began sucking up to my dad. As they had sealed payday with Grandpa, it was time to move on to the uncle. This persisted for a month or two. I wouldn't stand for it. Then came time for the will. My grandfather's lawyer read out the will to me. My father, mother, and sister in our home. Our two cousins would be briefed individually on their share of the estate, per my grandparents' requests. Then, the miracle line in the will comes to fruition. If anyone attempts to claim any part of the estate that is not assigned to them, they forfeit any assets they are supposed to receive and will be divided equally among the remaining family members. This was basically their way of saying, if you try to claim more than you're given, you get nothing. My father is supposed to receive every piece of physical property, aside from 2 or 3 items he set aside for me, from my grandparents, as he is the only remaining child. The revenge. I hatched my plan. I called my cousin and told him all of Grandma's jewelry was to be donated to a charity auction. Grandma's collection of gems and metals was extensive to say the least, so a charity event wouldn't care if a few pieces didn't make it right. It was a lure of gargantuan proportions that my greedy bastard of a cousin could not resist. He bit right on it and headed over to my grandparents' house ASAP, determined to snatch up as much as he could. A handful would send his kids to college. Regardless of what I said, the jewelry was never going to go to him anyways, so his actions were purely his own since none of it was destined to be his. Coincidentally, Dad was on his way with the lawyer to my grandparents' house to overlook everything, formality stuff. According to my dad's testimony, my cousin had 3 shoeboxes worth of Grandma and Grandpa's jewelry piled on the kitchen counter, ready for loading into his car. My dad and the lawyer stood in the kitchen, wondering why it was all there when my cousin walks in from my grandparents' bedroom with a 4th and final shoebox. The jig was up, and he put 2 and 2 together that I set him up. Which was true. But there was no penalty against me for exploiting my cousin's greed, so he would fuck himself over. It's worth noting that between the 18 years from my aunt's death and my grandpa's death, their wealth had increased several times over. So my cousin felt cheated and expected to receive just as much as my sister and I, despite receiving half of his already and blowing it. Throughout this whole ordeal, his younger sister, my other cousin, has not had a problem at all and is still weeping over Grandpa's death like the rest of us. However, just like that, my cousin lost enough money in the course of 30 minutes that made him contemplate his sanity. Over greed. My cousin's bitch of a wife apparently filed for divorce a few weeks later. We haven't heard from him in nearly 6 years, as he is all but disgraced now. You can call this a fairy tale ending, and on this particular part of the story, it somewhat is. There was a massive lawsuit by an unknown family member involving the IRS and FBI later on. But honestly, I would rather have my grandparents. Leave comments if you want the other part of the story. But it's not really a revenge story. The revenge was brutal. OP's cousin blamed him for many things that OP had not done. It was an attempt of his to strain OP's relationship with his rich grandparent. In return, OP tricked his greedy cousin into stealing their late grandmother's valuable jewelry and then got him caught. As a result, OP's cousin lost his inheritance. This was really an insane revenge. The next story is from the Venetia. Landlord screwed with the wrong tenant for too long. This will be decently long as it needs some context. I'm going to throw in a lot of stuff to make it all easier to understand as well. Minor details might not be entirely accurate, as I've no interest in a revival of this conflict on any level. I won completely, and any resurrection can only taint the experience. We'll start off by noting that I spent about 2 decades working in security. During that time, I worked many different types of security in many different locations. The one that matters for this story was time spent in the rental housing tribunal in a major city, as a kind of bailiff. For those not knowing what that is, think a courtroom. In a major city anyway. In a smaller town, it'll probably be an event room in a hotel or community centre, as you'd see on TV, but with less formality and an adjudicator instead of a judge. They functionally are the same thing to landlords and tenants, but they definitely aren't the same thing. This place exclusively deals with landlord and tenant disputes, and is the only place to resolve landlord and tenant disputes. Note that I wasn't a bailiff, and it wasn't a court, but these terms mostly accurately describe the situation and my place in it. For 2 years, I worked at the Rental Housing Tribunal. It was early in my time in security. I was 18 to 20. Being as it was a major city, the sheer number of cases I sat through was beyond my ability to count. I saw everything there was to see. No one is capable of surprising me with a story because I've seen them all. In detail, as a side duty of mine was to ensure all parties had copies of all evidence being presented. I did a lot of photocopying and always read/inspected everything I copied to ensure nothing got cut off or made illegible. By the time I stopped working there, I probably knew the way everything worked well enough to be an adjudicator myself. Well, no, obviously not, but I'm certainly in no need of a lawyer either, should I ever have need to go there. I also had intimate knowledge of how the system worked beyond the actual rules. Like, for example, adjudicators would always give a little leeway to anyone representing themselves over someone who had a lawyer, or how pissed off adjudicators would get when a party was speaking out of turn. Seriously, do not do that. Skip forward almost a decade. I left the city and am in a fairly large town in the same province. Same tenant laws. I have a few roommates in a decently sized townhouse. We get along well. But there's a problem. Only I can write checks and our paydays don't line up. So I'm the one who pays the rent, and I usually can't do it on the first because roommates don't usually all pay in time. We advise the landlord, we might be a day or two late, but we'll always have it by the third at the latest. They have no problem with it at all. I spoke to them myself. For about a year, this works fine. No complaints from landlord because even if we're often a day or two late, we always pay. We're also fairly quiet and don't damage the property. Nearly model tenants. I do not actually have any idea why, but one day this changed. I suspect a different person in the company started overseeing the region. One day, suddenly, we got a summons to the Rental Housing Tribunal, hereafter to be referred to as RHT, on the 2nd of the month for failure to pay rent. This doesn't actually lead to a case because we paid the same day. But now, we have to pay the application fee the landlord paid in order to serve the summons. I bitched to the neighbour, who was also the superintendent, and eventually heard back that their contact at the company was now demanding 1st of the month, no exceptions. Well, that really didn't work for us, so we probably had to pay that fee 15 to 20 times over the next 2 years. I could have gone to tribunal over it, but we were technically without a leg to stand on, and I knew it. Maybe if I went enough times, I can ding them for harassment, but I don't have time for that and my roommates don't care. After being split between us all, the fee wasn't enough deterrent to change our behaviour, so we accepted it. If this was the only issue, there wouldn't be much story though. At around the same time, the rent leeway vanished. So did mandatory maintenance. I'm not going to list everything that went wrong and wasn't fixed. You'll get a decent idea at the end. We suffered through it. We were all working too many hours at shit pay to be able to actually do anything about it. We adapted. But after about 2 years, it broke. Everyone but me up and moved out for various reasons within a 4-month period. I'm not going into any details on my roommates at all, because things kinda exploded for a couple different reasons outside of this. No reason to dig any of that up. I had been saving up a while and was able to quit my job without having to immediately get another, so I suddenly had a lot of time. I didn't want to stay and pay the rent by myself or have to find new roommates I could live with, and with my experience in the RHT, I knew I had the landlord by the balls. So I went for them. I stopped paying rent. Annoyingly, I didn't get a summons the first month, but I did the second, so I went. With a meticulously documented plethora of evidence of failure to maintain the property and entering the property without formal notice. I had a copy for the landlord and a copy for the adjudicator. I know from experience that technically you're supposed to give the other party the evidence before the tribunal, but I also knew about that leeway an adjudicator gives to those who represent themselves. So I didn't give the landlord the evidence until our case came up, 100% total ambush. They argued they were ambushed, but the adjudicator just dismissed the case, dressed me down a little, and told me to file my own summons, as I should have done. This was the petty revenge. The landlord and lawyer drove 3 hours to get there for nothing. Worse than nothing. I filed my own summons, and the big day shows up. It's been about 4 months of me not paying rent at this point. I'm prepared to if I lose, but I don't think I'm going to lose. The whole thing could not have gone better. I had 20 to 30 pages of evidence and 20-odd photographs. They had nothing. They had no actual defense for our water heater being out for 6 months, or us not having a fridge for a year, just to mention 2 severe issues. Their entire defense rested on us being late for rent, which actually worked against them once that led to the adjudicator learning how many times we'd paid the application fee, and lies that had no evidence to support them. They even talked over me a few times, and I saw in his eyes the one time I opened my mouth to protest during their turn to speak, but forced myself to shut up with every gram of willpower I had, so only a squeak came out. The adjudicator respected me. He had no respect for the landlord. I had won on every possible front. The only question was how much. It was more than I'd ever seen. I got 9 months of free rent, and the landlord was ordered to have everything fixed before the next month was over, or I'd get more. I gave notice I was leaving at the end of the 8th month and left at the end of the 9th. Because the landlord had never renewed the lease, I didn't have to give him the 3-month notice the lease specified. If you want a figure to put to it, I basically got a $13,000 judgment in my favour, adjusted for inflation and rounded. I also made the landlord and lawyer drive 3 hours, twice, only to lose. The landlord's face was so red at the end I thought he'd have a heart attack. He didn't though. Bye, Mark. Edit to clarify a few things based on questions. And I also want to add, for those good landlords out there, I do feel you. My time in the RHT was eye-opening. For every bad landlord, there are 10 bad tenants easily. There's a massive debate of debates to have over the whole thing. I'll only say that I do sympathise with the good landlords out there. I'm not trying to paint all landlords as terrible. This is the only landlord I've ever had that was so useless. Edit. I've revised my estimate of the ratio based on a little research and some comments from 30 tenants per landlord to 10. I'm probably still wrong, but the sheer number disparity between landlords and tenants effectively requires there be more bad tenants than bad landlords, simply because there are so many more tenants than landlords. I'm going to leave it at that and just beg you not to rip me apart from either side. I'm intimately aware of the problems both good landlords and good tenants face, and my sympathy goes out to both sides. Wow, the revenge was perfect. The experience and patience of the OP paid off, and the terrible behaviour of the landlord finally forced him to pay $13,000, not to mention the embarrassment he faced in the end. Almost all landlords are the same: terrible, meticulous and selfish, always trying to squeeze every last penny out of their tenants. Pro revenge story is from PJ Murphy. Not going to pay overtime? Think again. TL. Deekta, don't mess with the IT guy. I was discussing this sub with a good friend, and he said, "Boy, have I got a story that'll fit." It wasn't his story, but his brother's, and I sat with him and got the details. Buckle up, it's a good one. And a long one. Let's call him Bob. Bob has been fiddling with computers since he was a kid and knows them pretty well. As with most IT people, he's moved from job to job. The employer he worked for was a service/distribution company, and there were 2 IT employees. The company was located in Ontario, Canada. About 3 years ago, Bob's employer decided to modernize their software. They had separate programs for dispatching, for inventory, for payroll and finances, and it was complicated moving information from one program to the other. They decided to get an ERP, Enterprise Resource Planning program, and Bob recommended one that he knew inside out from a previous employer. For those of you who don't know, an ERP program handles everything: purchase orders, sales, inventory, personnel, vendors, customers, and all of it. You can run a report and find out which customer has bought the most Part ABC in the last year, which salesman has improved his numbers the most, which vendor has the fastest delivery time, which shipper packed the most orders. Everyone in the company used the ERP program, but it was very complicated, and they used the aspects of it that related to their position. For example, the receiver would accept a shipment, verify the quantity, confirm it was received, and the inventory stats would be available to the salespeople if they wanted to look up how many were on hand. The receiver didn't care what the price was or who the vendor was, he just did his job. Bob was run ragged during the implementation process, but he managed to train most of the employees on their aspects, and after a few months, everything was running fairly smoothly. Bob still got tickets for tweaks in the operation of the software and occasional hardware IT issues. Then the company decided to expand their footprint and was marketing into different time zones. That messed things up. Atlantic Canada is 90 minutes early, so if someone sent an email or an order at 8 a.m. their time, it would arrive at 6:30 a.m. Ontario time. Pacific Canada is 3 hours late, so an email sent at 3 p.m. Vancouver time would arrive at 6 p.m. This stretched out the day. So many staff came in early and worked late. Bob would arrive at 8 a.m., and there would be people that demanded his immediate assistance and were annoyed that he didn't respond instantly, even though their request was submitted before his start time. Same with late in the day. His phone would ring at dinner time with people that wanted help right now. They decided to stagger his and his IT colleagues' shift times. Bob would start at 6 a.m. and work till 2:30, and his colleague would start at 10:30 a.m. and work till 7 p.m. Bob's colleague had kids and refused the shift change. The employer insisted, the colleague quit. That meant that Bob was the only person in the IT department. The employer said they would look to hire a new IT guy, but they had trouble finding one that knew the ERP system, and they were offering well under a market value salary. Bob asked for a raise and was denied. Then he wanted overtime, and the employer told him that as an IT specialist, he was exempt from overtime laws in Ontario. Bob looked it up, and the employer was correct. This went on for some time, and he knew lots of IT people socially. They told him what the company was offering, and Bob knew that they wouldn't find another tech. Things went downhill from there. Bob would get chewed out if he missed a call or an email, no matter what time it came in. He had to train new hires in the ERP system, as well as take care of the hardware. He asked repeatedly for better compensation, and was denied, so he planned to get a new job. Now, here's the revenge. Bob had access to the entirety of the ERP program. When a user signed in, the time was logged, and even if they didn't sign out, after 15 minutes it would log them out anyway. Everyone in the company was on salary, and many of them came in early and stayed late. Ontario labour law states that even salaried workers are entitled to overtime after 44 hours a week, unless they were managers or supervisors. So Bob jumped into the program and ran a report for each employee that wasn't a manager, all the way back to when the ERP program was started. Then he reached out to an employment lawyer and got the okay to refer employees to him. Bob lined up another job, and after he left, every employee in the company got an email with an Excel sheet showing the hours they had put in past 44 hours a week. The subject line said, "You're legally entitled to overtime pay." In the body of the email was the lawyer's name. The shit hit the fan. Almost every employee authorized the lawyer to negotiate with the company on their behalf, and the company had to pay a ton of money. All the company had to do was pay Bob for the extra work he put in. Instead, they had to pay almost everyone. Bob's revenge was effective. The tracking of time using the company's ERP system allowed him to show the injustice he had to bear and helped his colleagues receive what was rightfully theirs by law. Instead of just quitting, Bob planned his exit well, making sure the company had to bear some financial repercussions of their decision to not pay overtime. His approach was brilliant, moral, and timely. It gave the company no other option but to award salaries to the employees they overworked. Justice was sweet, it was poetic, hitting them where it would hurt most, the bottom line. Perfect calculated revenge, if it were really so. The AI Tay for telling my stepmom she's right when she accused me of not respecting her grief. My dad got remarried after my mom died. I, 15F, was 8. She was very excited to meet me. I was way less excited, like not excited at all. My mom was dead less than 2 years, and I knew she and my dad were talking about getting married. I hated it. I didn't get why Dad was doing all that so quickly and why they had to get married at all. I said it in front of her when Dad told me I shouldn't look so down, and she told me I should wipe all that sadness from my memory because she was here now, and she'd bring the happiness back and make me forget all about what made me sad. Dad was like, OMG, and he told her how bad that sounded. I refused to let her touch me when she tried to apologize, and I told her to leave me alone. She talked to me alone a few days after that and told me I could at least try, that Dad wasn't sad anymore because of her, so I could be too. I told her she couldn't make me forget my mom died. She told me I never gave her the chance to. I told her I didn't like her, and I thought she was a bad person. She was horrified by an 8-year-old saying that to her face like I did. But I meant it. I still mean it. She tried so hard to get close to me, but I didn't want to get close to her. I was quiet around her. I didn't open up to her or share anything with her. My dad sent us on this pre-wedding girls' day because he wanted me to be closer to her during the wedding, which only happened a few months after I met her. I ignored her the whole day. She got pregnant right after the wedding, and she told me I should be celebrating all this happy news and this new life. And instead, I looked like I wanted to cry. I told her she'd never get what it's like. We had a really rough time during her first pregnancy. She wanted to include me. I wanted nothing to do with her pregnancy. I wanted nothing to do with her. It frustrated us both for different reasons. She told me to leave the past behind and look forward to being someone's sister. Then she told me most kids would be happy to have a mom again. I brought up the bad person thing again. She didn't try this stuff with her other 2 pregnancies, but she did always try to make me like her, and she tried to make me forget. I don't think kindly of her for that. I have no respect for her. I don't even call her my stepmom. That's respectful, and I don't want to be respectful to her. Her mom died not too long ago. She had a really hard time. I didn't care, and I didn't try to comfort her or offer any sympathy or kind words. I have none for her. She confronted me on it, and I told her she'd forget about it eventually. She accused me of disrespect and then said, I'm not being respectful of her grief. I told her she's right. She was never respectful of my grief, so I won't be respectful of her grief either. I told her she can wait for her dad to find the woman who'll make her forget. She called me heartless. She said I should care enough about her to not say that. I told her I never cared about her. Aita, OP is not an AH here because OP's stepmom repeatedly dismissed her grief and tried to force an emotional bond that OP wasn't ready for, especially after the recent loss of her mother. The stepmom's insensitive remarks about forgetting the past created a deep emotional wound, making OP's reaction understandable. While OP's comment about her stepmom's grief was harsh, it reflected years of unresolved hurt. OP's lack of respect stems from genuine feelings, not spite. The stepmom's own insensitivity makes it difficult to expect empathy from OP in return. Both sides need to work on better communication, but OP's feelings are valid given the circumstances. Let's now jump on the next story. Aita for standing up for myself when I got bullied by a kid. My third cousin by marriage is a 9YO and honestly is probably a sociopath. He purposefully breaks and steals people's property, even his grandma's family heirlooms, and constantly publicly disrupts things. Started shouting animals' noises during the quiet part of his uncle's funeral. He's just a piece of shit kid all around, and his 2 dads are pretty much hands-off and barely even supervise him, much less discipline him, and then also get really verbally aggressive when someone else speaks up to them about their son's unacceptable behavior. One of his new hobbies is telling me I look pregnant and that I'm fat. I'm a US size 10, so not tiny, but not really fat. I do have a condition called diastasis recti that I can't have surgery to fix until I'm done having kids, but it gives my belly a more pronounced appearance. I've explained this nicely to the kid and his parents multiple times, that I have this medical condition that I'm self-conscious about and I'm very sensitive, so please stop loudly saying I'm pregnant and calling me fat. He kept doing it, and he also only does it in front of large groups of people, like when we're all gathered around a fire pit or eating dinner. So I know that he knows I'm not pregnant and that it's inappropriate to be doing this. So we were at a family dinner this weekend, and this kid goes up to the bartender my MEL hired, it's a private event, and tells him not to serve me because I'm pregnant and an alcoholic. I went up to the bartender myself later, with a group of my husband's family, to get a glass of wine. He refused to serve me and cited this kid telling him I'm pregnant. I died inside. I was beyond mortified. I marched up to one of the kid's dads and told him what the kid did, and said that he needed to ask him to apologize to me because that was unacceptable. He refused and actually got offended that I would ask for an apology. I'm pissed. I walk up to the kid and say, "I know what you did with the bartender. Why did you do that?" To which he replied, "It was funny." I clapped back, saying, "You know what? I understand why your original mother and father didn't want you and put you up for adoption. You're a bad kid." The kid starts bawling. It's the first time I've ever seen him cry. I just walk away. He told the whole family, and I just said that I asked him why he did what he did. I'm sure people believe me because this kid also lies a lot, but I feel kinda bad and wonder if I was out of line or if there's something else I should have done instead. I also rationalized it as, well, maybe now he'll learn that if he messes around, he'll find out and think twice about hurting someone next time. Aita, NTA. The OP was relentlessly bullied by the child whose parents never disciplined him or even talked to him about his actions. This left the OP helpless. While her comment to the child was harsh, it came after enduring repeated public humiliation and frustration with no support from the adults responsible. As OP's reaction was provoked by the kid, OP is not an R. The next story is from Wrecked Your Shit. Partner with limited authority over management. Playing from workers' dugout though. I had recently partnered with a small production facility in my area. Our contract was based on capital investment, along with implementing new automation processes. 2YR Outlook finished in 8mo. Was a typical small production facility comprised of 50 production workers through 2 shifts of 12 hours that ran 2 days on then 3 days off. Also had 2 production supervisors for each shift and 1 maintenance supervisor for each shift. The people and their attitude is ultimately what led to my decision to be more than an outside contractor for this company until I worked the night shift for a week due to shutdowns that needed to occur to implement certain line upgrades. This is where I met him. We will call him Richard Head. Richard seemed like a nice guy in our first few encounters, and then I heard him in his element directing his maintenance crew at night over the radio. He would belittle this group of guys who were there to do a set task list every night for whatever machinery they were doing preventative maintenance on, unless something broke on the line, which would require attention first, obviously. I have never heard grown men spoken to like this, and never heard any nasty remarks back, or defending themselves. He would call them stupid on the radio if they were having trouble troubleshooting a problem, call some fat and lazy, called one black guy the Ni-tas. The guy had been there since they opened the doors, and to be honest, made me want to rescind any commitment I have ever made to this company. When I escalated this up to the plant manager, he assured me that it was friendly banter, and they rarely had complaints against him. True, because anyone who ever did so in confidence of anonymity was always outed and then singled out until they were terminated by him. Since no one was going to listen to me, I decided to do my due diligence and started to document everything I heard on the radio with a date, time, witnesses to the treatment, and what rights the individual was having violated due to our state and federal outlines. I made this spreadsheet my entire time in the shift documenting every personal account I witnessed as well. Harassment is a major problem with industry work. But the one that I have learned is the company killer is retaliation. If you can prove that, then they stand no chance. I saw him one night tearing down this 50-year-old man who requested 2 days off to the point, I wanted to lose my cool, but knew it would ruin all the information I was gathering. Days off were because his nephew was just in a car accident 2 days prior and had to have multiple reconstructive surgeries scheduled. I knew that now was the time to move on everything. I rounded up all the maintenance guys and shared all my documentation with them. They didn't realize the importance of this information like I had. They just said, nothing will change. Nothing changed because no one treats an issue as an issue if you come with incorrect, non-detailed information. The fact that he used the radio so much was a godsend that they didn't see as well. When he spoke this way to people, he must not have ever realized that there are other supervisors on shift, and that they unintentionally became the strongest witness in the cases, especially when you have some audio recordings verifying the accounts. They have no choice but to acknowledge what they have heard. Each worker took their logs, and even though I have a capital time investment in this facility, I urged them at a minimum to petition to have this man removed or to threaten legal action. Once they coordinated a day to expose all this, it was like watching a sports movie when the underdogs take the championship and get the girl at the same time. Not only did the man finally get fired, but the entire atmosphere around the place changed more than I could imagine. Older machines ran the best they have ever run in my time there, and people loved coming to work again. They also put a placard on my door for when I came in about a week later. It said, "Mo one boss," but the boss was crossed out, and hand engraved under it was the word "badass." I obviously removed it from my door, but I put it in my home office, and is probably the best thing I have ever received from a facility. OP did a wonderful job by documenting verbally abusive behavior of the supervisor, Richard Head, towards the maintenance team and showing it to the higher authorities. This finally led to his removal. This incident turned OP into a hero. The story is from Infinitum Vortex. Director said, process contracts faster and don't fuss over details. Okay, you'll lose bonus. Initially had this story in RR malicious compliance, but came across this subreddit through comments. I work with a federal contractor, responsible to buy or bundle hardware, software, etc. any government organisation needs, and review the contract in terms of financial viability and legal clauses. In other words, ensure we make money and we are legally covered. The contracts range from 5K to 40 mailers last year. Our company went through a reorganization, i.e. fire people, and give more work to people still left with the company while paying us peanuts. We are a small company with less than 200 employees and trying to retain our government customers, while big companies like Amazon Cloud will replace us in less than 10 years. The government customers love working with us because this is the only thing we do and treat the customers better than big contractors who don't care. They laid off 30 people from my team of 50. So now, 20 people do the work for 50 people at the same salary. We are paid by the month and not work hours, and we don't get sales bonuses, important in the story. I have a habit of reviewing everything carefully and spending hours on each contract, even one that just makes us a few $1,000s. Government vendor selection process is slow and they are very risk-averse, so a lot of customers start at a few $1,000s and end up in an 8 or 9-figure contract if everything goes well. Since people were laid off, I was struggling with the work volume, and as a result, contracts were piling up. The sales director, i.e. different team, did not like me as I was slow, and also catching any tricks the sales team tried to play by over-promising the customer or something shady. Government clients, just customers, loved working with me, the support I provided, and was truthful regarding our capability and our drawbacks. This was something else the director hated me for, since he thought I am tanking sales. However, almost all my clients were repeating customers for over a decade. Example: sales wanted a school district to buy outdated Dell Windows laptops while entire state was moving towards new, cheaper Chromebooks. Schools don't have budget, and whatever they buy stays for 5+ years. Sales were offloading expensive, useless stuff to get better bonuses, and also charged customer nearly $1 million to provide IT support for faults arising from ancient hardware. During my conversation with the school district, I shared examples of state governments in the Northeast buying Chromebooks and saving money while future-proofing the hardware. My job was to get best quote to customer and develop trust to sign a 5 or 10-year contract. So this school district bought Chromebooks, which were 40% cheaper and had less than 20% of the previously quoted IT support cost. As a result, sales team lost a few $1,000s in bonus, but we brought this customer with us for a 5-year contract. The sales director got pissed as I was working on small contracts at a slow pace and reprimanded me in front of our manager. The manager did not care and did not defend me and asked, "Why don't you follow what the sales director says and stop fussing over small contracts?" I said small contracts turn into big ones, hence I should pay attention to them as well. Mistakes in small contracts could harm us if the contract becomes big. I am struggling at work because you gave me the job of 3 or 4 people. At this point, he was shouting at me that I don't understand contracts. He has been doing this stuff for 5 years and he makes more money in a month than I do in a year, so I should listen to him and not question him. This was a bit insulting as I live in a shared apartment and am struggling to make ends meet while he drives an expensive luxury car and just goes out on fancy lunches with government employees. I asked the sales director to send an email with a list of suggestions to improve my work. He rudely complied and said, "Can you not even remember what I just said in the meeting?" His email said, "Do not review contracts less than 100K and trust sales team that due diligence has been done." I replied by copying my manager in the email that this could create liability in the future and want him to confirm again that the sales team will do financial and legal compliance themselves for the small contracts, and I need to stop revising small government contracts below 100K with no exceptions unless told otherwise. This was gold. Cue malicious compliance. Instead of 2 hours, I spent 10 minutes on small contracts and voila, backlog cleared and I am home by 6:30 p.m. Now, a contract worth 10K comes through. I found some issues with this contract since it said that we offer 30% rebates to our software providers. This was something we stopped doing 5 years ago, and now we just offer software providers a 5 to 10% rebate on contracts. Also, I knew the government client recently got a massive budget and was on a spending spree, part of my job. There is a high chance that this 10K customer will become $100 and the 30% rebate means we have to give $30 on top of the usual cost. But I remembered what the sales director said. Why don't you follow what the sales director says and stop fussing over small contracts? So 10 minutes later, I email, "No issues detected based on compliance check by the sales team." As I mentioned, government contracts are slow. No one cared, so I raised the 30% rebate issue since it was just a 10K customer. 10 months later, the state government customer said they want to work with us and get at least the same terms or better terms for a new $50 million contract. This was the largest contract in our company's history. The sales director happily gave him a handshake deal that we will offer the same or better terms. Government can legally just buy more on their current contract, so the sales director had no issues promising the same terms. Given contract size, everyone from legal, IT and finance gets involved to work on just one contract. For 3 months, everyone worked on one contract. The sales team was giddy that they will get million-dollar bonuses. I don't get a sales bonus to ensure I protect customers and the company. The finance team finishes their review and said the company is going to lose $8 and not make any money. Everyone is shocked. The sales director gave a deal without checking with us, and we cannot go back on something we offer. Changing contract terms is frowned upon by the government, and they have legal contracts stating nothing will change. We are legally obligated to offer the government the same terms for 3 years. The legal team says we need to take a hit on our balance sheet and swallow the losses. The CEO called a big meeting in a fancy conference room with big TV screens, and everyone had to find a scapegoat to take the blame. Every department lead, managers, and people involved in this contract were summoned. The sales leader had to explain to his team why they won't get bonuses on this big contract they spent over 3 months. Finally, legal and finance meet and share their findings. We lost money due to the 30% rebate clause. The sales director goes crazy and blamed me in front of everyone and asked me to pack my stuff in front of 30 people. Follows by saying, I am terrible at my job despite 100% customer satisfaction. I calmly opened my laptop and connected the display cable and opened Outlook while displaying his email on 3 big TV screens stating that I should stop reviewing small contracts. While all 30 people read the email with a faint smile, I await the sales director's reaction. He goes into rage mode claiming I misunderstood his email and am terrible at my job. Then I scroll down where he ignored my warning regarding potential liability to the company, and his response explicitly asked me to ignore that. His face turned white when he realized he fucked up. He then blabbered, trying to find some other scapegoat making racist tirades against our IT consultants in Vietnam, and just lost it. Aftermath. I was told to spend 2 to 3 hours on each contract, and the company eventually figured out that it is cheaper for them to hire 20 people like me and pay us 70Ks every year than to take big losses on their contracts. Our team has 40 members now, still less than 50, but enough to offset the contract volume. Because of the losses, sales director had to pay back his previous year's bonus, as he had a clawback clause with the company, i.e., if you screw up, you need to pay us. The sales director had to pay nearly 300K and was fired from his job. Present day. He then sued our company for wrongful termination, and we just heard today that he lost the case and now owes us another 200K legal fee. Now he owes over $500,000 to our company. TL, DR, company fired people, and the sales director abuses me when I cannot do the job of 3 people. He ignored my warning that mistakes in small contracts could cause millions in losses to the company. He ended up causing the company millions in losses and gets fired from his job, tried to sue the company, and now owes over $500,000 to our company. End of TL, DR. Update 1. A lot of people may ask, why am I still doing this job which pays less than state wages, and I might be able to make more in other companies? I help government customers buy good stuff from many hardware and software companies so they don't overpay or rely on one big company. I feel proud when I can save tax dollars and help customers. During COVID, a lot of state governments went remote, i.e., local meetings on Zoom, and keeping the government running while working from home. There was a budget freeze due to COVID, the economy shutting down, and since COVID relief bill was months away. This was a time when the sales team had helpless government customers willing to sign anything just to get remote hardware and software. I saw this as extortion, and despite being an introvert who lacks initiative to get promoted, I was able to convince the CEO to offer free 60-day trials of expensive hardware and just charge setup and transportation fees. This was a big risk, but we brought an insurance company to offset any damages. I convinced the CEO that this is the time for us to show we are partners with the government, and it was an emergency. The sales team was mad for a month, then realized that all those free customers were calling us for paid contracts over companies that are 10x our size, that would usually win contracts by lobbying or taking government decision makers to expensive lunch or something like Super Bowl tickets. I legally cannot disclose the exact government entity by name, but can vaguely say that some entities in the state government of New York and the state government of Florida were both using this trial program during the first wave of COVID. I might change jobs soon, since we got a 3% salary hike in the current market, while the company has nearly doubled its revenue in a few years. Update 2. I just remembered another story that made sales leaders hate me even more. This is during the COVID wave when we all were working from home and I was getting used to Zoom. We had a telecom contract with the state government during COVID, and everyone joined a Zoom call to discuss the contract. The sales team was increasing this customer's telecom bills from $60K a month to $300K a month. I objected that increased calls during COVID are not high enough to justify such a big price hike, and we should increase the bill to $100K a month. This was enough to cover the cost and even improve profit margin percent. But the sales team started laughing and saying, If the customer can pay more and is ready to pay more, why am I being so vocal? Leadership asked me to shut my mouth and proceeded with a 300K contract. So I started working on other stuff and minimized the Zoom app. I don't end Zoom calls myself as the meeting admin ends it. Everyone said, "Bye, nice meeting you all," and I naively assumed the call ended. I vented my frustration by saying, "These salespeople are like wolves when the country is going through shitty times." A co-worker sent a chat message a few minutes later that everyone heard what I just said. No one complained or confronted me, but this offended them. Also wanted to add, all sales team members are not like this. Almost all the new sales reps are eager to learn from everyone and not pushing stuff, but talking to customers. However, new sales reps mostly handle small or low priority contracts. Any big contract gets automatically transferred to sales leadership. Basically, it is not a revenge story. The story reminds us not to ignore even a minor detail when dealing with cash. A small mistake cost the company 8 million USD. By the way, when the director tried to put the blame on OP, he avoided it by showing the director's email, which resulted in the director losing his job. Next story is from At My Limits Now. AETA for signing my kids up for public school behind my wife's back. So I, 36M, am a dad to 6-year-old twins. And my wife, 28F, is a stay-at-home mum who has recently gone full crunchy mom mode. She's all about essential oils, no processed foods, cloth diapers when they were babies, and she's absolutely against anything mainstream. For the longest time, I didn't mind because a lot of it is about healthy living and I want the best for our kids. But things are starting to get way out of control. The latest issue is that my wife is dead set on homeschooling the twins. She's convinced that public school is toxic and that our kids won't thrive in a system that's designed to make them little robots. She even has a few friends in her crunchy mom group who homeschool their kids, and she's been talking non-stop about joining their co-op. I've expressed my concerns about this from the beginning. I work full-time, and I don't think she realizes how hard it's going to be to manage homeschooling 2 kids at the same time while giving them a proper education. But she won't hear it. Anytime I bring up public school, she shuts it down immediately, saying she doesn't want the twins to get bullied or that we'll lose control of what they're learning. I just don't think homeschooling is realistic, and I can't see how she'll keep them on any sort of consistent schedule. I gave her time to prove me wrong over the summer, thinking maybe she'd ease into it and have a plan. Instead, she's spent most of the time bouncing between different unschooling philosophies and signing them up for random activities with her crunchy mom friends. The kids are constantly bored, and I've seen them starting to fall behind. I'm not proud to admit it, but I went behind her back and enrolled the twins in public school for the fall. I told her a few weeks before school started, and she absolutely lost it. She accused me of betraying her and said I was undermining her role as a mother. She keeps saying, I don't trust her to raise our kids, which isn't true. I just don't think she's prepared to handle homeschooling, and I don't want the twins to suffer because of it. She spent the whole first week of school trying to make me feel guilty by saying the twins are miserable and that I've ruined their childhoods by forcing them into the system. The thing is, as far as I can tell, the twins actually loved their first week school. They've made friends and like their teacher. But my wife keeps insisting they're just pretending to like it to make me happy. Now, she's talking about pulling them out mid-year and starting over with her homeschooling plan, but I'm putting my foot down. I want the best for my kids, and I honestly think public school is the right choice for them right now. My wife is making me feel like I'm the bad guy for going behind her back and forcing them into something she was so against. AETA for enrolling the twins in public school without her consent? Should I have handled it differently? I'm starting to feel really guilty about what this is doing to my wife. OP is not the a-hole. His primary concern is the children's education, which he felt was compromised by his wife's ineffective homeschooling approach. Despite expressing concerns and giving her a chance, the wife's resistance and lack of a structured plan led OP to enroll the twins in public school, where they're thriving. OP's decision reflects a practical solution to ensure the children's educational needs are met. While the method of handling it could be debated, OP's actions were driven by genuine concern for his kids' well-being and the practicality of the situation. Let's now jump to the next story. Aita for not moving my wedding date to accommodate my sister's pregnancy. I, 25F, have a sister, Ella, 28F. Ella and I have always been close growing up, despite her being 3 years older. We've always been best friends. I was her MOH and she's mine. Ella is currently 5 months pregnant. She had a rough first trimester, throwing up 3-4 times a day, always tired. Some days she couldn't get out of bed, literally. She had also found out early when she was a month into it because her symptoms were so bad. Her and I live close to each other, and since her husband travels a lot for work, I have stayed with her a lot since I work remotely. My fiancé and I had originally set the date for July. However, seeing how sick she was, I, along with my entire family, were getting worried. And so after my fiancé and I discussed it, we decided to reschedule the wedding until after she had passed her first trimester. Per her doctor, she was supposed to get better. I need to add that no one asked this of us, but I felt it was needed. And thank God, she did get better. She's eating normally, going out and back to herself. Seeing this, my fiancé and I talked about our wedding again. I had always wanted a summer wedding on the beach, but I didn't want to wait a full year, and seeing winter wedding pictures was slowly growing on me. And so, we decided on a December wedding. The invitations were finalised last week with the date and were all sent a couple of days ago. Yes, it's early, but my man and I all have big families, big group of friends and colleagues. We need the RSVPs early. Yesterday, I got an angry phone call from my sister asking how can I do something like this to her. I was honestly confused and told her as much, and she went on to rant about how inconsiderate I was to not wait until my nephew is born, that her being MOH and 8 months pregnant is going to be hard, and that she has already been through hell. I calmly explained to her that while yes, she is MOH, I don't expect her to go above and beyond. My best friend and her had already planned a girls' night back when my wedding was in July, so we're just going with that again. Everything is already bought and my best friend will set it up. I told her that my man and I have also rebooked everything ourselves. Flowers, venue and catering are going to be done by our friends who have their own shops and companies, and that I'll pay to have her dress resized to accommodate her bump. I'm even taking care of hair and makeup for all my wedding party. A sort of pamper session where we'll all get ready together and take pictures. All she's required to do is show up. She's having none of it and is demanding we reschedule it again until next summer. I put my foot down and gave her a flat-out no. My parents called me and asked me to reconsider, saying that I know she's emotional and hormonal. I told them that's not an excuse for her to act like a bitch. Any opinions, advice are much appreciated. Edit. First of all, thank you for all the comments and advice. I'm definitely seeing her side more than I was before. I do need to clarify some things that I didn't add in the post. When we rescheduled the wedding, her and Bill had my fiancé and I over for dinner. We do weekly dinners every Friday. She thanked me for rescheduling and told me she felt guilty. I made sure to tell her that I don't blame her, that having her there healthy and happy is what matters, in whatever capacity she can give me. I made sure she knew that she could step down from MOH at any point, even if it was a day before the wedding, and that I would understand. That dinner, my man and I also floated the idea of a winter wedding around, and both her and her BIL said it would be fun since we haven't had that in our family yet. We also chose the date around many of our family's schedules, along with our friends' availabilities, who were also being gracious enough to still do our wedding flowers, catering, and renting us the venue, despite us rescheduling it once already. We didn't decide anything lightly. Also, I might update, if I ever figure out how, because my parents called and invited me to their house so my sister and I can talk it out. I have no idea why she's using a third party, even if it's our parents. OP is without a doubt not the a-hole. At first, she pushed the plans of her wedding just because she was worried about her sister's health, but later picked a month of December because it suited her and her fiancé. OP even proposed reasonable modifications such as altering the dress of MOH and hair and makeup and specific that her sister only needed to show up. Given all this stuff, OP is certainly not an R. Bye-bye for now. Let's see you tomorrow.